In the world of martial arts, there is a common expression used when something beyond common sense happens. This expression is, "Such is the true law of Jianghu." This expression became an internet meme and means that in this world only the strongest survive. And a girl named Heaven really liked this phrase. Every time the hero of another martial arts novel said this phrase, she felt relief. Because any adult living in the modern world has experienced something similar at least once. For example, when a manager handed Heaven a stack of documents and then asked her to sort and send them by the end of the day. At such moments, she always really wanted to use the law of Jianghu. Meanwhile, the manager asked if Heaven had finished reading the martial arts novels he recommended to her. In response, she assured with an awkward smile that she had already read them, for which the manager praised her, since other employees wouldn't even look at them. The performance evaluation depended on the manager, so Heaven continued to smile awkwardly. Initially, she started reading the novels to make a good impression, but they turned out to be truly interesting. Although at first glance it seems that the authors put all their effort into martial arts, inside all this lie personal destinies, love and romance of the characters. And sometimes the heroes risk themselves to protect the back of a comrade. Sometimes Heaven dreamily thought that she would like to live like this, at least once. However, this did not at all mean that she wanted to become a secondary character in a martial arts novel, and even a servant in a clan that poisons its own servants. Now, instead of an office, Heaven was in the most famous poisonous clan, the Tang family from Sichuan, and had even become their servant. Suddenly, Sister Sanji entered the room and complained that Huon was lost in her thoughts again instead of doing the laundry. Huon immediately picked up the dirty clothes, and Sanji warned that there was sweet soup at lunch today, so it was better to bring a stain remover. This meant that the clothes would require some effort today, but Heaven had no choice, so she hurried outside. As for the Tang family, in the martial arts world it is better to be their allies. Then Sichuan will become a place with noble traits and its own loyalty for you. But if you become their enemy, then Sichuan will turn into a place that does not shy away from vicious and treacherous methods. The Tang family is a clan of warriors balancing on the edge of the righteous and dark path. Their weapon is poison, which is why Heaven never felt any sympathy for this clan when reading novels. But of all the places she could have ended up, Heaven found herself in the Tang family from Sichuan, and even reincarnated into the body of a modest servant who did the laundry. And today was already the third day since this absurd and inexplicable reincarnation happened. While doing the laundry, Heaven wondered, is there any point in living as a real slave after living as a corporate slave? For 3 days she worked without a break in a world without compassion and loyalty, which finally made Huon lose her patience and declare that the Jianghu law had hit rock bottom. But then her sister Sonji approached her and said that clothes should not be washed in the yard. It is better to do it in the laundry because the elder of the Tang family is extremely sensitive. Heaven was still poorly oriented in the unfamiliar place, so she did not want to go far. But Sonji was very persistent. And finally, she warned Heaven that the senior manager had ordered all the servants to gather in the Yaon garden before lunch. In response, Heaven said she understood everything, but at the same time she once again plunged into anxious thoughts. She still did not know where she was. Moreover, she had neither money nor strength nor connections, and this frightened Heaven very much. However, behind these frightening thoughts, she realized late that she could not find the laundry. Leaving the hall and turning left, Heaven was supposed to see a willow, but instead she found herself in the middle of the square. The maid who got lost on the way to the workplace. From such an embarrassment, Heaven sat down on the ground and grabbed her head. However, in the next moment someone approached her from behind and asked, "What is she doing here?" And when Heaven turned around, she saw a young man, and judging by his magnificent green robe, he was clearly not a servant. But then Heaven snapped out of it and quickly got to her feet because she remembered that not everyone in the Tang clan could wear a green robe. Only those recognized as masters of the Tang family's martial arts can wear it. In other words, the status of this young man is much higher than hers, and perhaps he is even the direct heir of the family. Therefore, Huon respectfully bowed her head and, noticeably nervous, admitted that she got lost on the way to the laundry. However, in response, the young man calmly stated that Heaven was an idiot, which made her almost forget about his status, but she still restrained herself. Then the young master ordered her to follow him and added that a child who doesn't even know the way to the laundry cannot understand who he is. Heaven silently obeyed the order, but in her thoughts declared that even the children of the Tang family have absolutely no manners. Soon the young man led Huon to the laundry, and how surprised she was to realize that the laundry had been just a few steps away all this time. After that, Heaven was forced to admit that the young man was right about her, so she sincerely thanked him for his help. Then, in response, the young master advised her to memorize all the roads as soon as possible, and warned that if Heaven remained so slow, she wouldn't even get rice porridge. Only after that did the young man decide to inquire about the girl's name. Heaven wanted to answer, but immediately remembered that she did not know her name in this world. For all these 3 days, no one had called her by name. So in response, he even said that her name was not worth the young master's remembering. He looked intently into Heaven's eyes, but then abruptly turned away and said that she could go. Heaven did not want to tempt fate, and hurried to the laundry before the young man asked again. But as soon as she left, the young master immediately called his loyal bodyguard, whose name was Gyeonmyeon. He came at the first call, but addressed the young man as the elder of Tanchun. Then Gyeonmyeon looked after Huon and asked, "Who is this child?" And then in response, the elder of Tanchun said that although she looks like an ordinary child, there is something suspicious about her. After finishing the laundry, Heaven headed back to the servant's house, complaining along the way that the clothes were not getting fewer each day. However, passing by the main building, she noticed a crowd of maids, which immediately reminded her of the meeting. Sister Sonchji hurried her, and for the first time she addressed Hevon by name, and she finally learned that in this world she was called Sohee. Meanwhile, the chief steward came out to the crowd of maids. He was accompanied by a woman wearing a green robe, but Sohee thought she looked like an ordinary maid. But Sister Sonchji said in surprise that this was Lady Jing herself. She was appointed head of the palace servants, which means she is the direct superior of Soki. And then the chief manager announced that a meeting of the 5 great clans would soon take place. Therefore, the servants must watch themselves and not disgrace their masters, as the honor of the great Tang clan from Sichuan is at stake. Then Lady Jing took the floor and declared that she would not be lenient with idlers, so all the maids must promptly get to work. The servants immediately began to disperse to their tasks, and Soki decided to ask Sonji, "What are these 5 great clans?" Her sister was surprised by the question, but still explained that among the 5 great clans are their Tang clan from Sichuan and the Namgun clan. Next comes the Northern Ping clan, the Moyun clan, and lastly, the Jegal clan. Then Soki asked if the 5 great clans often meet together, to which Sonji replied, once a year. However, the meeting place changes each time, so in the Tang clan, it happens every 5 years. But then Sonji pinched Soki's cheek and asked, "How can you not know such things after living in the clan all your life?" In response, Soki assured that she was simply curious. Then her sister calmed down and hurried her to lunch. Soki followed her friend, but inside she felt nervous because she would finally see the masters of the 5 great clans, about whom she had only read. However, she was not alone. Why the young gentleman kept coming to the laundry, which greatly troubled Soki. It continued like this until she dared to say that a noble person should not come to such a place. However, in response, Tanchun calmly stated that in the Tan clan there is no place he could not go. And then the young man suddenly asked if Soki was all right, to which she finally admitted that she was very tired. Nevertheless, Tanchun noted that despite her fatigue, Soki was doing an excellent job washing clothes soaked with deadly poison. Ordinary people would be in critical condition from the slightest touch, but Soki felt only tired. However, at these words, she immediately threw away the poisoned clothes and asked in horror, why was she only told about this now? In her defense, Tanchun said he thought Soki already knew, to which she asked in a trembling voice, should she take the antidote? But Tanchun reassured the girl, assuring her that she was perfectly fine. Moreover, he explained that in the Tan clan they do not wash poisoned clothes, they burn them. From this followed the question of why someone would give Soki poisoned clothes to wash, but the girl did not know the answer. Then Tanchun smiled ominously and declared that the answer was obvious. Someone tried to kill Soki by giving her poisoned clothes. From these words, Soki was horrified. After all, she was a simple maid. Why would anyone wish her death? However, the next moment, Tanchun flicked Soki on the forehead and said he was just joking. Most likely, the other maids just wanted to scare her because they disliked her, as Soki was like an open book to them. But Soki believed that slipping poisoned clothes to someone just out of dislike, in a normal world, is called an attempt on murder. Meanwhile, Tanchun stated that Soki still did not need an antidote, since without resistance to poisons, survival in this clan was impossible. Poisons are produced and researched only in the depths of the clan's inner halls, but completely removing the poison that seeps into the air is impossible. That is why all servants must undergo training and develop resistance to poisons. For this, they consume a medicinal decoction containing poison once a week. After these words, Soki understood why the food yesterday had such a terrible taste. It was all because of that decoction. However, Tanchun assured that Soki no longer needed to drink it. Since she had already coped with the deadly poison, it would now be a waste of medicine. Also, Tanchun was extremely interested in observing Soki, so he promised to come here more often. As a farewell, he advised her to find Lady Jing and then left. Soki watched him go, and although she was not sure, she still hoped that Tanchun would continue to come here because he cared about her. And then Soki decided to listen to his advice, and thus, with dirty clothes, showed up at the office of the chief manager. Madame Jing immediately jumped up from her desk and indignantly asked, "Does Soki understand where she is at all?" But the chief manager immediately smelled oleander on the clothes, and therefore calmly reminded that poisoned clothes should be disposed of according to protocol. But Soki already knew this protocol, and she came here not for advice, but to report the arbitrariness. Madame Jing anxiously swore that she never gave the order to wash the poisoned clothes, so it was the subordinates who made a mistake during execution. However, in response, the chief manager got up from the desk and asked Soki, "Does she need an antidote?" Tanchun assured that she would be completely fine, but just in case Soki did not refuse the offer to take the antidote. Then the chief manager handed her a box with the antidote and inquired Soki's name. However, when she said her name, the chief manager suddenly flinched, and Soki found this reaction very suspicious. Then he cleared his throat and stated that Soki no longer needed to do the laundry. And then the chief manager addressed Madame Jing and instructed her to sort out this misunderstanding regarding the poisoned clothes. After that, Soki thanked them both for their help, and since she no longer had to wash clothes, she left the office in high spirits. However, in the next moment, Lady Jing held her back and asked, "Is she really the daughter of Choryan?" Sohi could not have known about this, as she had only recently relocated here. Meanwhile, in response, she said that blood cannot be deceived, with which Lady Jing agreed, since Sohi looked exactly like her mother. And she also revealed that Choryan was the greatest beauty of Sando. From the memories, Lady Jing became emotional and declared that if she had only known that Sohi was alive, she would have taken care of her long ago. Moreover, Jing mentioned the clan leader, calling him indifferent, and Sohi found this strange. But then the lady confidently headed to her room to personally inspect and provide Sohi with everything necessary. But seeing the servants' dormitory, Jing asked in horror, how did her blood relative end up in such a cramped little room? However, to Sohi, this room seemed much larger than the studio she rented in her previous life before relocation. Meanwhile, Lady Jing admitted that she would like to relocate Sohi immediately, but unfortunately, it would be difficult to do so now. And then she suddenly hugged Sohi tightly and promised that she would relocate her within 10 days. At this, Jing said goodbye to Sohi and wished her a good rest. And when the lady left, Sonshi approached Soki and asked what she had done, since Jing had come here. In response, Soki stated that she did not know herself, and then asked her sister, why did she not warn that the dirty clothes were poisoned? But Sonshi was only surprised and answered the question with a question. Didn't Soki herself say that poisons do not affect her? Now Soki was surprised, and then her sister reminded her that these meannesses were arranged by Simyan and her retinue. But every time Soki said there were no problems with the laundry. And now Soki says such strange things, and even dared to accuse Sonshi, for which her sister gave her a slap on the head. However, after the whip came the carrot. Sonshi stroked Soki's head and praised her for finally telling Lady Jing everything. After that, her sister hurried Soki to dinner, but she thought all the way about who the real Soki was. After all, she preferred to deal with poison rather than get involved in conflict with people. And Lady Jing, for some reason, mentioned the clan leader. Because of these oddities, Soki began to wonder, is it true that she ended up in the body of a servant nobody needed? From the next day, Soki was supposed to be in charge of cleaning the training hall, as informed by the very Simyan that Sonshi had talked about. Only Soki perfectly understood that since Simyan could no longer entrust her with washing poisoned things, she decided to send her to the training hall, which reeks of poison. From such meanness, Soki asked herself, how can a person be so malicious, especially to someone younger? The real Soki might have agreed, but heaven was not going to give in, so she responded with a rude refusal. Simyan clearly did not expect such audacity, but one of her friends decided to talk to Soki instead of her. The maid explained that Soki's resistance to poisons was better than all of theirs, so they could not enter the training hall. However, Soki was not convinced by these words and replied that all maids train equally, so if the training hall is dangerous, then no one should clean it. But then the maid carelessly said that since nothing could be done, they would send Sonshi to the hall. At these words, Soki was horrified, and the maid reminded her that Sonshi had quite weak resistance to poisons. That was when heaven understood why Soki always agreed. She was being blackmailed through Sonshi. For Soki, who had neither family nor friends, Sonshi was the only one who looked after her. Heaven understood that if she refused now, Simyan would indeed send her sister to the training hall, so she asked, where is this hall located? In response, the maid rudely handed Soki a broom with a pass to the territory and explained that she should go left, then turn right. And finally, Simyan threatened that if Soki pulled some foolish stunt again, the consequences were already known to her. Soon Soki reached the gates of the inner courtyard and showed the guard the pass. However, finding herself in unfamiliar territory, she got lost again. The inner courtyard turned out to be much larger than the outer one. This was because only direct members of the Tang family and people with high status lived here. And there was also a whole plum orchard with a decorative pond. Seeing such beauty for the first time, Soki wanted to touch the sakura petals. But as soon as she reached out her hand, at that very second, Gyeonmyeon appeared behind her and sternly asked, "What is she doing here?" Frightened, Soki twisted her ankle and almost fell into the pond, but the next moment she was caught by Tanchun. And when Soki turned around, he asked with a smile, "Could it be that she still hasn't remembered the way?" In response, Soki respectfully addressed Tanchun as a young master, which made Gyeonmyeon furious. He was about to shout at the girl, but Tanchun told him to hold his tongue. Gyeonmyeon did not dare to defy the elder's will, but Soki decided that since such a formidable man backed down, Tanchun must be the young head of the clan. Meanwhile, Tanchun inquired where she was headed, to which Soki explained that she was ordered to clean the training hall. But then, for some reason, Tanchun sighed sadly and told Soki to follow him. The elder ordered Gyeonmyeon to stay in the garden, which made him look at Sohee very unfavorably. Tanchun decided to escort the girl to the hall and explained on the way that servants are forbidden to enter the garden freely, so Sohee must be careful from now on. After that, the girl realized that from Gyeonmyeon's point of view, she looked like an uninvited guest. However, Tanchun was interested in one question. Does Sohee really not know the way, or is she just pretending to be lost? At these words, Sohee flinched, and Tanchun looked at her like a cobra looks before striking its prey. Then he painfully grabbed the girl by the cheek and declared that he could not understand her at all, because she looked like an ordinary maid but at the same time like a suspicious spy. However, when Sohee cried out in pain, Tanchun realized and immediately withdrew his hand. At that very moment, Sohee's legs gave way, causing her to fall to the ground. Tanchun became seriously worried because he thought he had just pinched Sohee but apparently misjudged his strength. Through her tears, she complained that she could barely breathe from the pain. Then Tanchun suddenly said in surprise that even her crying face reminded him of Huon. Sohee did not know who he was talking about, and in the next moment, Tanchun easily lifted the girl from the ground and declared that he would take her to the training hall. Sohee wanted to say something, but Tanchun did not want to hear anything, and calmly threw the girl over his shoulder like some kind of load. However, before he could take a single step, Sohee still managed to explain that she had dropped her broom. Soon they reached the walls of the training hall, where Tanchun finally let the girl go and handed her a gingerbread cookie. But when Sohee ate it, Tanchun immediately offered her a second one. The girl understood that in this way he was trying to apologize, but at this rate she would not have dinner today. Also, Sohee was amazed by Tanchun's bottomless sleeves and wondered, where did so much food come from in them? Meanwhile, sounds of fierce training came from behind the wall. Then Tanchun explained that Sohee would have to wait another hour, because there is a rule that the training hall cannot be cleaned until the last training session is over. Sohee realized that if she was unlucky, she would be cleaning the hall in the middle of the night. However, in the next moment a kunai flew over the wall, which would have definitely hit the girl if she had not caught it. At such a sight, Tanchun was amazed by Sohee's impressive reflexes. However, she immediately threw the weapon away, belatedly realizing that she had almost died, which amused Tanchun. But after laughing, he suddenly asked for permission to examine her hand. Sohee did not object, but when Tanchun touched her hand, she suddenly felt warmth flowing and spreading through it. Then Tanchun explained that Sohee quite well senses ki, and since it was so, he suddenly asked enthusiastically, would Sohee like to learn martial arts from him? However, all the girl could respond to such a proposal was a surprised and hoarse, "What?" Then Tanchun explained that he wanted to teach her martial arts, but Sohee understood everything the first time, yet wondered if he even knew what he was talking about. As if the Tan clan would allow some servant girl to be taught martial arts. Everyone would think that Sohee simply seduced the young master. Besides, she believed that at such an age, Tanchun could not possibly be a teacher. However, the next moment he became serious and stated that Sohee had too many thoughts, as if he had read them on her face. But before Sohee could say anything in response, a clan warrior named Bugyeon ran out of the training hall, looking for a kunai that had flown over the wall. However, noticing Tanchun, the man immediately froze and asked in surprise, what brought him here? But in response, Tanchun grumbled irritably that he was just taking a walk, upon which Bugyeon quickly apologized and declared that it was a great honor for him to meet the elder. However, Sohee lost the power of speech from the last words because she only knew one Tanchun from the books that the chief advised her to read. This is the King of Poisons, a master who regained youth from the novella Namgun Chiona. Meanwhile, Tanchun noticed the shock on the girl's face and, patting her on the shoulder, assured with a smile that he had hidden this fact not to tease her. But Sohee didn't care now. She simply felt relief that she finally knew which novella she had been transported into. However, then Tanchun suddenly declared to Bugyeon that he wanted to make Sohui his adopted daughter. The sudden turn stunned not so much Bugyeon as Sohui herself. However, seeing the shock on their faces, Tanchun assured that he had not yet fallen into senile dementia. Bugyeon tried to justify himself and said that it was just very unexpected, and Sohui looked like an ordinary maid. But then Tanchun had to explain that Sohui was indeed an ordinary maid, and if there were Tan clan blood in her, he would not have to adopt her. Then the elder asked Bugyeon to stop asking stupid questions and ordered him to inform the clan head, Muhyok, of his decision. Bugyeon swore he would deliver the message and asked Sohui her name. However, upon hearing it for the first time, Tanchun flinched, and in the next moment, he asked excitedly, "Could it be that Sohui is Muhyok's youngest daughter?" But in response, the girl timidly admitted that she did not know her parents. Then the elder decided that he had simply made a mistake, and yet Soki was registered in the clan and did not even know the name of its leader, which was very suspicious. Tanchun suggested that Soki had not been in the clan for long, which was close to the truth, as the girl had indeed arrived here a week ago. The matter was then closed, and the elder suggested that Soki return to his house to have a cup of tea. But the girl reminded him that she needed to finish cleaning the training hall, to which Tanchun calmly stated that Bugyeon would take care of it. He was surprised and was about to object, but under the elder's suggestive look, he immediately changed his mind. Arriving at Tanchun's house, Soki could not help but notice the mess reigning there. Books with documents and manuscripts were scattered all over the floor. The elder became slightly nervous, and clearing his throat awkwardly, explained that a certain order was maintained in this place. Then he brought a teapot and asked if Soki knew how to brew tea properly. In response, the girl admitted that she did not, so Tanchun promised to teach her, and before leaving, he would give her some tea leaves. Then he offered Soki a cup of tea and explained that it was called monjong. The tea turned out to be very sweet in taste, and the elder meanwhile added that Soki herself could buy a whole handful if she saved her entire salary for about 10 years. Soki choked on realizing how expensive this tea was, and Tanchun slyly promised that if she agreed to become his apprentice, he would make sure Soki could drink this tea any time. However, in response, the girl stated that it was not a big price, which forced Tanchun to admit that despite her appearance, she had character. In that case, he promised to provide Soki with food and monetary allowance, and she would not have to quarrel with other servants. In response, Soki tried to explain that she was just an ordinary modest maid. However, Tanchun looked at her again with that snake-like gaze and asked, "Was that a refusal?" Soki immediately became nervous and began to assure that she was just afraid she wouldn't manage, which amused the elder. But then he declared that everything was decided, and today Soki could rest from work. And starting from tomorrow, she would work as usual but come to Tanchun in the evening. If Soki said she was carrying out an errand in the elder's chambers, no one would doubt it, and she would have dinner here before leaving. As promised, upon parting, Tanchun gave the girl some tea leaves and let her go. And when Soki left, he immediately called Gyeonmyeon and asked, did he find out anything? In response, Gyeonmyeon reported that Soki is an orphan who grew up in the Tang clan's pagoda since childhood. After these words, Tanchun decided that Soki just had a similar name, because Choryeon and her child could not survive after 10 months of taking Hakshanhan. Meanwhile, Gyeonmyeon revealed that Soki has had incredibly strong resistance to poison since childhood, and as for the servants' bullying, it was all because of her outstanding appearance. However, rumors say that in the last 7 days, Soki started behaving strangely. She was a very quiet child, but recently suddenly began to show character. Then Tanchun remembered that exactly 7 days ago he met Soki for the first time. Therefore, he asked Gyeonmyeon, is it possible that she is a spy sent from outside? In response, he said he would check for traces of using a human skin mask, after which Tanchun let him go. And the elder himself wondered, did he accidentally pick up a rare jade, or did someone throw a poisonous jade stone here? One way or another, Tanchun intended to find out personally. When Soki reached the dormitory, it was already dark, and the girl herself was very tired after this busy day. As if the transformation of the young master into an ancient master was not enough, in the end she also became his personal disciple. Having entered this terrible world of martial arts, Soki naively believed that Tanchun was just a child. From her side it was too careless, but who could have thought that this was what the supreme elder of the Tan clan looked like? And yet, now Soki at least understood which novel she had ended up in, and that was already something. This novel is called Namgun Hue, and it was the first story recommended to her by her boss. The plot was quite ordinary and began with Hui's victory in the Strongest Under the Heavens tournament. Then Hue began to wander the martial arts world, reviving the Namgun clan and becoming its head. He began spreading the Namgun sword throughout the world. For this, Hue earned the nickname Emperor of the Sword. but Soki did not remember what happened next. Perhaps because she had read this novel a long time ago. Namgun could be described as a model of justice, but strictly speaking, he did not shine with manners at all. Hui always provoked villains with cunning words, and when they could no longer restrain themselves and attacked, he arranged a brilliant demonstration, beating them half to death. However, today Soki realized something important. To survive, she needs to get accurate information, and now there are two ways to do this. The first of them is to check whether Namgun will be at the upcoming meeting of the 5 great clans, and whether Tanchun intends to give Hu a potent poison, Mandukdan. Hu will receive it only after winning the martial arts tournament. So if Tanchun still has this poison, it means the events are happening before the tournament. Only Soki did not know how to find this out, because if she asked the wrong question, Tanchun would decide that she was a spy trying to steal the pill and would kill her. Tormented by these thoughts, Soki barely made it to her room, where the worried Sonchi was already waiting for her. Her little sister asked why Soki returned so late, but she no longer had the strength to answer. The girl began to have a fever, so she immediately went to bed. But sleep was slow to come. And then Soki thought that if she carried out orders without thinking, perhaps she would have a chance to survive. Only Soki did not want to live like that, and before falling asleep, she thought, how nice it would be if only she could go back. But unfortunately, even this night Heaven failed to return to her native world, so she immersed herself in work. However, that morning Tanchun ordered her to come to his house after sunset, fearing that people might misunderstand everything. So today, instead of cleaning the training hall, Soki will have to clean the elder's residence. Only Soha did not want to clean up that dump, and she also heard from other maids that Tanchun was so sensitive and picky that it was not worth getting caught in his sight and always be careful. However, in the next moment, the elder suddenly asked Soha to put down the broom and give him her hand. The girl did as she was told, and then Tanchun said with annoyance that her hand was too small to properly hold a throwing weapon. Therefore, at first, the elder put a coin in Soha's hand and asked her to throw it. The girl asked where, to which Tanchun pointed to a red rag tied to a tree. Then Soha got nervous and said that it was impossible to hit it from such a distance, but the elder smiled and asked her to just try. And how surprised the girl was when after the throw the coin hit the tree. Moreover, the coin was able to pierce the rag through, which stunned Soha. Meanwhile, Tanchun praised her for the throw and, handing her a second coin, asked her to throw it this time at a blue rag tied to an even more distant tree. Soha was sure that she was just lucky the first time, but the next moment the coin again hit the target. The elder noted that Soha had quite a lot of strength and asked her to return the coin, but approaching the tree, the girl saw that the coin was embedded in the bark. It was then that Huon realized that these were all the abilities of the real Soki, for she tirelessly worked day after day. And perhaps her parents were martial arts masters, because in this world physical strength and endurance are often inherited. Only from this, Huon felt somewhat uneasy. That day her powers were revealed, but little changed. Instead, a simple routine was formed. Early in the morning, Soki went to the residence of Tanchun and cleaned there. After lunch, she spent the whole day throwing coins at targets. And after dinner, the girl returned to her quarters and repeated the 1,000-character classic poem. That was how her day ended. It seemed like a simple daily routine, but sometimes Soki thought she would die from exhaustion. The worst part was throwing coins. Tanchun made the task harder, and now Soki had to throw coins into a pond to catch fish. The elder explained that the ultimate goal of this training was to learn to control countless variables. For example, the direction and strength of the wind, which change every day, as well as the weight of the air, which depends on its humidity. Sohai must be able to feel all these changes and accordingly adjust the strength and speed of the throw. With these words, Tanchun demonstratively threw a coin into the pond and hit a carp. Then he handed a hefty pouch of coins to Sohi and declared that from that moment she must try to catch fish with their help. And she would have to do this until she succeeded, which terrified Sohi herself. In the end, this exercise was one of the ways to lay the foundations for mastering the art of memorizing the Tan family. But from that day on, Sohi plunged into a real hell of coin throwing. And lately the carps have become incredibly agile, probably because of her constant attacks. By the end of the day, the girl was so tired that she no longer had the strength to just get to bed. Sohi simply lay down on the floor, for which her sister Sonchi scolded her every time. However, that evening someone came to their quarters and asked Sohi to step outside for a moment. Sonchi whispered that it was a young master and quickly began to lift Sohi from the floor. She still did not understand who this unexpected guest was, but she did not argue with her sister. Behind the door, a tall and handsome man in a green robe was waiting for Soki, who immediately apologized for such a late visit. Soki respectfully addressed the stranger as a young gentleman and asked, "What brought him here?" However, the formality clearly upset the man, and he asked to be called, as before, Brother Yun. Soki felt awkward calling the stranger brother, but just that word instantly cheered him up. Then Yoon admitted that he did not expect the trip to Jianghu to take so long, which made him worry about Soki. Also, Yoon brought her a gift, which turned out to be a beautiful hairpin. Only Soki was horrified by such a gift because she remembered the chief's words that a hairpin means a marriage proposal. However, then Yoon, with an awkward smile, admitted that he had bought nothing for Juki or Choki, so this would be their little secret. Soki did not know whom he was talking about, but firmly decided that he was a womanizer, and therefore declared that she could not accept such a valuable item, so she would accept only his feelings. In response, Yoon became nervous and asked Soki to at least try on the hairpin, because last time she also refused a gift. However, Soki was adamant, so Yoon put away the hairpin and, apologizing, assured that he did not want her to feel uncomfortable because of such a gift. But then Yoon smiled and asked, "Would sweets be suitable then?" The girl barely had time to answer when Yoon already handed her a pouch with treats and said he just wanted to give her something. So he shyly thanked him for the gift, to which Yoon said he would go rest after the journey. However, before leaving, he reminded Sohee that if she found it difficult, she could always come to him. Watching Yoon leave, Sohee thought he did not seem like a bad person, and maybe she had been too emotional with him. But then Sanji looked outside and asked what Yoon had said, to which Sohee admitted she did not know why he had come. Then her little sister said that Yoon cared about Sohee and had come to see her immediately after returning from Chengdu. Sohee was surprised and asked why the young master had arrived with guests from Chengdu, to which Sanji explained that they were relatives on the maternal side. Also, her sister noted that Sohee had been incredibly strange in recent days, but she explained it was because of the very hard work. Starting from the arrival of guests from Chengdu last night, guests from other great families began arriving one after another. The maids ran around like crazy, receiving guests and preparing everything for the meeting. But Sohee's daily routine remained unchanged. Tanchun ordered her not to go outside, and she could do nothing about it. This morning the elder asked Sohee to stay in his residence because her appearance stood out too much. And most of the offspring of great houses behave like idiots, so Tanchun swore to turn them all into eunuchs if they tried to do anything to the sweet maidservant. The elder will be absent for several days to receive guests, but if anything happens, Soki must use his name, and if that doesn't work, insist on meeting Gyeonmyeon. Staying inside the residence will be the safest, but that means Soki won't be able to find out the information she needs. And the carp were even more agile today, which annoyed the girl even more. However, the next moment someone behind suddenly said that the fish move along a certain trajectory, and if the girl continues to throw like that, she won't hit even in 100 years. Soki immediately turned around and saw before her a blue-eyed youth in white clothing. Judging by this clothing, the boy was not from the Tan clan, so Soki decided that he was one of the guests invited to the meeting. But suddenly this very guest loudly asked, did she understand his words? Soki was confused, and the boy proudly put his hands on his hips and explained that she needed to watch the movements of the fish and throw the coins ahead of time. And then this impudent fellow even grabbed Soki's hand and said he would show her how to do it correctly. Soki resisted, but the boy was stronger and didn't even notice that it hurt her. And the next moment, the coin hit the carp right on the head. The boy was delighted and asked Soki if she understood now, but the girl was more concerned about her aching wrist. The young man again paid no attention to this and asked offendedly, does she even know who he is? Soki knew perfectly well who he was, a rude brat who had invaded the residence of the supreme elder of the Nam clan, but aloud she assumed he was just a guest of the clan. Then in response, the boy indignantly declared that he was Namgun Hui, the young master of the Namgun clan. Soki, of course, knew that Namgun Hui was rude, but she did not expect that this child would be him. And since the main character of the novel is so young, the current events take place much earlier than the main storyline. Meanwhile, Hui proudly declared that since Soki now knows who he is, she must show him respect. This brat had absolutely no manners. But after all, he was the future pillar of one of the 5 great clans, so it would be better not to make a scene in front of him. Soki understood that she had to do her job and escort the guest of the Namgun clan to his chambers. However, instead she disdainfully stated that such behavior was absolutely improper. Only after a second did Soki realize what she had just said. But a word is not a sparrow. So the girl decided that if something went wrong, she would simply mention the elder's name. However, to her surprise, Hui suddenly shyly apologized to the girl, and then he finally noticed the bruise on her wrist and, startled, asked, "Does your arm hurt badly?" Sohai assured him that everything was fine, but Huey did not want to hear anything, and anxiously declared that he would give her medicine that his uncle personally made. However, the next moment the boy's stomach loudly growled from hunger. That was when Sohei realized that this child was just wandering around because he was hungry and lost. Therefore, she decided to escort him to the guest reception hall to feed him. Only Sohei did not know Would the elder get angry if he found out she brought a stranger here? On the other hand, knowing Tanchun's character, Huey might be liked by him for his bravery. Meanwhile, Huey put a box of ointment on the table and explained that his uncle, Wan Rayon, was the head of the medical hall, so he could safely use this ointment. So he was amazed by this, because a person of her status could not even see such a thing. The girl took the ointment and decided that she needed to bring some to the dormitory and treat her sister Sanji's hands. But then Huey asked if Sohee had already eaten lunch, to which she replied that she would eat after escorting the young master to his chambers. Then Huey suggested having lunch together, but Sohee anxiously asked, "Is it proper to share a meal with a servant?" In response, Huey proudly declared that Yonha drinks tea with Gyogyo every day, but Sohee had no idea whom he was talking about. Then Huey explained that Yonha is his elder sister, and Gyogye is her maid. In that case, Sohee agreed to have lunch together, which made Huey very happy. Soon she served lunch on the table, and then Huey suddenly asked, "Had Sohee ever been outside Sichuan?" In response, the girl explained that she had lived her whole life in the Tang clan, and asked a counter-question. Was it the young master's first time in Sichuan? Then Huey said that he wanted to come here 5 years ago, but his sister stopped him. The thing is, at that time Huey still did not know how to ride a horse and could not stay in the saddle. Then Sohee decided to ask, "How old is the young master?" To which Huey replied that he was 13, and asked the same question to the girl. In response, Sohee said she was 15, and noted that the young master's elder sister cares a lot about him. Huey agreed with her words and said that he has 3 elder sisters, and Yonha is the youngest among them. At such news, Sohee mentally sympathized with the young master's future wife. However, then Huey became sad and said that despite the fact that he is already an adult, his mother and sisters treat him like a child. Then Sohee said that it is all because the young master's family worries about him. But in response, Huey objected, stating that at his age his father and uncle had already entered the world of martial arts, while he had only just left his parental home for the first time. With these words, Huey finally touched the food, but after swallowing the first piece, he suddenly shuddered. And when Sohee looked up at him, she saw how the young master trembled all over and covered his mouth with his palm. The girl jumped up from the table in horror, assuming that the food was poisoned. But fortunately, it turned out to be just very spicy. For people from other regions, Sichuan cuisine can be unusual, so Sohee suggested preparing dishes with fewer spices. But Huey, through coughing, declared that a man from the Namun clan would never back down, and stubbornly continued the meal. However, after finishing the food, this man from the Namun clan greedily drained a glass of water, and then asked if Sohee had ever tried Anhui cuisine. The girl had never heard of it before, and then Huey explained that Anhui cuisine is also tasty, but not as spicy and has a deep flavor. Then the boy even began to boast that tea from Huashan is tea that even the abbot of Shaolin likes. But Sohee was not impressed by this fact and asked dispassionately, "Had the young master finished dining?" However, in response, Huey suddenly jumped up from the table and asked to be shown the Sichuan market. Such a request puzzled the girl, as the elder Tanchun had ordered her not to leave the residence. Moreover, after her relocation to this world, Sohee was so immersed in the life of a maid that she had never once gone beyond the walls of the Tan clan. Therefore, she told Huey that first they should warn the escorts, but he declared that his father would never give him permission. Then Sohee tried to explain that if the guards saw the young master, his father would definitely find out everything. But in response, Huey carelessly suggested simply jumping over the wall. At that, Sohee panicked and said she wouldn't be able to do it. But the young man assured her that it was not even 10 meters there, and if they were careful, no one would find out anything. And before the girl could recover, Huey had already run out into the yard and happily hurried her along. To her regret, Sohee realized she could not persuade him otherwise, and all she could do was escort the young master to the outer gates. But fortunately, as soon as they left the inner courtyard, they immediately found themselves on a busy street. Only Huey clearly expected something else, and therefore said with displeasure that Sohee was boring. But in her defense, the girl reminded him that she could not jump over walls unless the young master decided to carry her on his back. Huey took the girl's words literally and immediately offered her his back. Then Sohee quoted the words of Confucius, that after reaching 7 years old, a man and a woman should not sit together until their marriage, so she cannot climb onto the back of the young master. I was surprised that a simple maid read the Confucian classics, so Sohee had to quickly change the subject, pointing to the market. She was very lucky that Huey was still a child who could be easily distracted and interested, and soon this was confirmed again when the young master's attention was attracted by a shop with unusual delicacies. The shop owner immediately guessed that the young man was from another city, and offered him to buy roasted Shiba. In response, Huey quickly agreed and asked for 2 portions, for himself and for Sohee. The owner praised the young man for caring for his companion and said it would cost 5 won. But how surprised Soki was when Hui showed the owner a silver yuan bao, worth 500,000 won. She immediately stopped the boy and explained to him that it was too much and paid for the food herself. However, when they moved away from the shop, Hui still asked, "Why can't the yuan bao be used?" Then Soki had to explain to him that this amount is much more than a person can accept. And then she added that the young master should not show such a huge amount of money in front of other people. But Hui did not understand why, since the owner of that shop could not have touched such money, even if she had worked her whole life. Then in response, Soki said that that was exactly why Hui could not do it, because people nearby had seen his yuan bao. Neither he nor she could know what would happen after their departure, and possibly in the worst-case scenario, late at night a thief could have broken into that owner's place, who would kill the woman and take the money. At these words, Hui was horrified, and Soki reminded him of his own words, that the owner could not have touched such money, even if she had worked her whole life. Excessive blessing can turn into a disaster, and good intentions do not always lead to good results. Hui had not even thought about this, and therefore suddenly declared that Soki was smart. And then he just as suddenly turned around and added that it was time to return. At such a change, Soki was surprised and thought, had she made a mistake or were her words too bold? And when they returned to the palace at the outer gates, the girl noticed a crowd of people from both the Tang clan and the Namun clan. Soki became worried that they were all looking for the young master, and in the next moment her fears were confirmed when the head of the Namun clan noticed the son. He immediately ran up to Hui, and making sure he was all right, said that he should have warned him. In response, Hui respectfully stated that he had acted thoughtlessly, and from now on he would ask his father for permission. Then the head of the Namun clan turned his attention to Soki and asked his son, "Who is this girl?" But the answer shocked both the head and Soki herself, because Hui declared that he wanted to take her with him to Anhui. Then the young man asked his father for permission, but in response, he could only ask, "Why so suddenly?" As for Soki, she decided that the young master had gone crazy. There was no truth in that, so the head invited both of them to his chambers. There Hui explained to his father that Soki was very smart, so he wanted her to be close to him. In response, the head grabbed his head and awkwardly asked his son, had he done anything that would make the girl want to stay close to him? But Hui did not understand the question at all, so Soki shook her head negatively instead of him. It was as if a stone fell from the head's shoulders, but then he asked his son, had he asked the opinion of this girl? And predictably, naive Hui said not yet, but Soki would definitely be glad because Anhui was a wonderful place. From the girl's expression, the head understood that she fundamentally disagreed with such a proposal, and finally asked, "What is her name?" In response, Soki warned that she had no surname and only gave her first name. Then the leader asked about her parents, to which Sohi confessed that she was an orphan. In that case, the leader asked the main question. If Hui asked to join the Namun clan, would she agree? Sohi became nervous and, apologizing in advance, explained that she was under the guardianship of the elder Tanchun, and therefore could not decide on this matter. At the mention of the name of the king of poisons himself, the leader of the Namun clan himself became anxious, and then he told his son that fulfilling his request was impossible, which made Hui ask why. Then the leader had to explain to his son that if he continued to insist, the Tan clan would cut the tendons of the unfortunate servant, which horrified Sohi. Meanwhile, the leader added that this is what they do if a martial arts master decides to leave their native clan. Then, with a voice trembling from anxiety, Sohi assured that she did not know the secret martial arts of the Tan clan. But in response, the leader explained that the Tan family is different from others, and their principle is that all martial techniques must remain within the clan walls. It was then that Sohi realized that she was destined to live and die in the Tan clan, and she also understood that the elder had not said a word about such a horror. But the boss from her past life once told her that cutting tendons is a punishment intended for clan disciples who have committed a serious crime. However, in the next moment, the elder Tanchun appeared in the window and greeted the head of the Namun clan. And after exchanging pleasantries, Tanchun asked if he could take Sohi. The head, of course, did not object, but the girl's legs were terribly numb from sitting for a long time. However, the elder did not wait and simply threw the girl over his shoulder. But before he could leave, Hui asked him to wait, and then the young man promised Sohi that he would return the money she spent because of him in the market in double. Tanchun wanted to hear more about it, but Sohi asked him to carry her away from here as quickly as possible. The elder fulfilled her request, but Sohi did not expect that he would jump high into the air with her and fly over the wall. Well, after landing, the girl had a natural question. Why doesn't the elder walk on the ground like a normal person? But in response, Tanchun calmly explained that walking on roads is tiring because the weight just goes in circles. Then Sohi realized and asked, "Is it true that a person leaving the Tan clan has their tendons cut?" The elder thought for a moment, then said that he had never seen anyone try to leave the clan. These words instilled hope in the girl, which made her already decide that the head of the Namgun clan was simply mistaken. But at the same moment, Tanchun added that usually such people are simply killed, which made Soki stunned. The elder noticed this and explained that if they allow a madman, who had the sense to leave the clan, to live, sooner or later, he will harm them. Then Tanchun asked if Soki had thought about leaving the clan, which made the girl start to assure that she had just heard about it when young Master Hui was being dissuaded from taking her to Anhui. But suddenly the elder grabbed Soki by the face and grumbled discontentedly that this cheeky brat knows how to recognize valuable jade. After that, Tanchun even began to feel the girl's face, and soon delivered the verdict that this was definitely not a mask made of human skin. However, then his hand lowered and closed around Soki's neck, and in the next moment the elder emitted a deadly aura and suddenly asked the girl, "Why does she seem so suspicious?" Soki could not move from fear and did not understand whether she had made a mistake by asking about leaving the clan or by entering the quarters of the head of the Namgun clan. However, then Tanchun removed his hand from her and calmly stated that apparently Soki has memory problems. Then the elder explained that he asked because the girl had lived within the walls of the Tan clan for more than 10 years, but still knew nothing about its rules. Soki could not believe what she heard, because the elder had just found an excuse for her himself. And already a moment later she confessed that it was true, and told that waking up one morning, she could not remember anything. Then Tanchun said that he had already heard that some people in the clan lost memories after taking herbal medicines. So he was amazed by such information, but in the next moment a familiar voice called the elder. It was Yoon, who came to pay respect to his grandfather. But noticing Sohee with him, he asked in surprise, "What is she doing here?" Tanchun immediately became alert and also asked, "How does Yoon know the maid from the outer courtyard?" The elder had already begun to think that his grandson was a fool for girls, but Yoon assured that it was not so, and stated that Sohee is his younger sister. Not only the girl was stunned by such news, but even Tanchun, and Yoon reminded his grandfather about Choryen from the Pavilion of Lunar Fragrance. The elder remembered this woman well, because 16 years ago Yoon's father got drunk like a dog, and then he finally realized that Sohee is the daughter of Choryen and Muhyuk. However, in the next moment Tanchun emitted such a monstrous aura that Yoon and Sohee began to suffocate from choking. And then the elder's face twisted with anger, and through a snarl he loudly questioned, "How can one be so insane?" Trembling and gasping, Yoon asked Tanchun to calm down. But the elder could not calm down at all, because the clan appointed an idiot as their new leader, who could not even create poison. And the direct descendant, possessing immunity to poisons, was thrown into the outer courtyard like some miserable servant. Yoon tried to explain that his father did not know about Sohee's immunity, but Tanchun declared that she was his child, he should have known that. And worst of all, the elder almost took the life of the true heir, immune to poisons, who was born once a century, with his own hands. But while Tanchun was shouting angrily, Sohee felt the pressure more and more, making it difficult for her to breathe. Yoon noticed this and tried to tell his grandfather that Sohee could not cope with his aura. However, in the next moment Yoon suddenly coughed up blood, and there was so much of it that Sohee, horrified, decided that he was dying. This was the last straw, and the girl lost consciousness. The last thing she saw before the world was swallowed by darkness was Tanchun rushing to help her, and it was him whom Sohee saw first when she opened her eyes again. The girl quickly got out of bed and looking around realized that she was in the elder's private chambers, and he, with great guilt, asked her not to get up and apologized for causing a scene. Sohee lay back down on the bed, and then Tanchun explained that he was her great-great-great-grandfather, but she could just call him grandfather. Then the elder addressed Yoon and told him to rest as well after everything that had happened. But he asked for permission to stay a little longer because he was worried about his sister, which made Sohee mentally ask his forgiveness for the misunderstanding. However, Tanchun was adamant and fatherly reminded him that a person with weak meridians should not overexert themselves. Then Yoon still obeyed and said goodbye to his sister, promising to visit her again. However, Sohee was alarmed by the elder's words about weak meridians, because it is a disease where blood vessels become clogged and a person dies young. When Sohee had just started reading novels, the chief explained to her that most often this ailment affects children from wealthy families, but only because they can see a doctor and get a diagnosis. Children from poor families cannot even see a doctor, so they simply drop dead. Readers feel more sympathy for the talented hero who dies young, which made Sohee regretfully wonder, why are authors so cruel? Meanwhile, Tanchun warned that he would also go rest, and Sohee should stay here for the night. The girl realized this and was about to return to her room, but the elder declared that one night on the floor would not break him, and then left. And left alone with herself, Sohee realized that now all the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. a body completely impervious to poisons and absurdly strong for a simple girl. A strange reaction of people that heaven had observed since the moment of her reincarnation into this world. All because she ended up in the body of an illegitimate child who was abandoned as a servant. Heaven cursed the Tan family for their madness. But by cruel irony, in this world she turned out to be one of them. And worst of all, Soki is an illegitimate child whom the clan rejected, which throws her into an even deeper pit. The next day, Tanchun decided to visit the clan leader together with Soki, who was her father. Only the whole way the girl for some reason spent under her grandfather's arm. At the gates of the residence of the clan leader, guards awaited them, who asked them to wait while they informed the leader of the guest's arrival. However, the elder did not want to wait for these formalities and simply jumped over the wall together with his granddaughter. And then, without ceremony, he entered the leader's office and called him over. If Muhyuk was surprised by the elder's sudden visit, he did not show it. However, then Tanchun lifted Sohi before him like a small child and declared that he would raise his daughter as his own. It was then that Muhyuk's face finally twitched with shock. But in the next moment, the clan head pulled himself together and asked the elder not to interfere in the upbringing of his daughter. And then he gave Sohi a look as if he were looking not at his own daughter, but at a lump of dirt. To calm her fear, Sohi smiled and remembered the proverb, "You must not spit in a smiling face." But Muhyuk did it without hesitation, sternly questioning her. Why did she decide to stir up the past when she herself swore to live quietly? However, Tanchun immediately defended his granddaughter and reminded that it was precisely because of Muhyuk that this child, born once in a century, rotted in the servants' quarters. Then, in his defense, the head declared that he had fulfilled his part of the bargain. He sheltered the prostitute mother and her daughter so they would not die of hunger. But to his words, Tanchun said with a smirk that all of this was complete nonsense. Then Muhyuk lost his patience and, releasing a sinister aura, declared that he was simply following the clan's rules. So he again found it hard to breathe, while the head meanwhile asked Tanchun, would he really risk undermining his authority for this girl? However, in the next moment, the oppressive aura dissipated as soon as the elder shielded Sohi with his body. And then he advised Muhyuk to always remember where the authority of the leader really comes from. It is given by the elders, and they can take it away at any moment. From such a threat, Muhyuk angrily struck the table with his fist and was about to say everything he thought about Tanchun. But he had already said everything he wanted, and at the end only warned the leader that from now on Soki was under his protection. And when the elder and the girl left the office, Muhyuk could not calm his anger for a long time. Leaving the chambers and going outside, Soki finally felt relief. She was still shaking after the meeting with her father. Noticing this, Tanchun gently placed his hand on Soki's shoulder and asked if she was all right, fully understanding the shock his granddaughter had experienced. Startled by the unexpectedness, Soki only nodded affirmatively. But inside she was overwhelmed with emotions. She was very angry at Muhyuk. Tanchun only smiled in response and advised Soki to give free rein to her anger, as befits someone from the Tan family. After all, in this world only the cruelest survive. Sighing heavily, Soki felt a little lighter in her soul, perhaps because Tanchun was on her side. Since the training was over for today, Tanchun suggested Soki take a little walk to the back mountain. Soki immediately brightened up. A smile appeared on her face and she happily agreed to the proposal. Smoothly lowering himself to the ground, Tanchun asked Soki to open her eyes. To her delight, Soki discovered that they were in a blooming meadow in the middle of the forest. Therefore, she immediately rushed with interest to examine the flowers that covered the entire meadow. Meanwhile, Tanchun, settling on the root of a huge tree, took out 2 wooden cups and a vessel with tea from his bosom. Smiling, he called Soki to join him. Sitting on the root next to Tanchun, Soki carefully took the cup in her hands and noticed with amazement that the tea was hot. Could it be that Tanchun boiled the water using internal energy? Smiling, Tanchun nodded in response. Then Soki became curious whether water could be frozen like in some kind of ice art. Tanchun sincerely believed that his granddaughter was laughing at him, because water can be frozen even without mastering ice art. And to confirm his words, the cup in his hand began to be covered with ice. Also, Tanchun promised to teach Soki this art later. But Soki was very surprised because mastering such an art was only possible for great masters. Nevertheless, Tanchun was not joking when he said he would become Soki's teacher. He made this decision even before he learned that she had the blood of the Tan clan. And now that this became known, Tanchun simply could not allow such talent to be wasted. Therefore, from this day on, he would personally teach Soki the art of poison. However, until Soki could stand up for herself, Tanchun wanted her to remain in the status of a servant, because Muhyuk's third wife was quite cruel. Soki was very surprised to hear that the head of the clan had 3 wives at once. Of course, she could not have met any of them before. This fact did not surprise Tanchun at all, because Soki lived quietly, and moreover, had lost her memory. Nevertheless, Soki had to learn that the Tang clan were the hegemons of Sichuan. However, besides them, there were also the Chonsin and Ami clans from the 9 sects in these lands. Suddenly he asked Soki how to act so as not to yield to these two formidable forces. Then Soki suggested that it was necessary to increase the army. But her answer only amused Tanchun. Could it be that his granddaughter had read many books on military art? Although gaining combat power that everyone would fear is also a good way, the most important thing was to strengthen the influence of the Tang clan in Sichuan. At this point, Soha began to realize that Tanchun meant strengthening influence through strategic marriages. The first wife of the current clan head, Jegal Moran, was the precious daughter of the Jegal family. The second wife, Mrs. Im, the only daughter of the head of the Baekpun Trading Guild, one of the most influential guilds in Sichuan. The third wife, Mrs. Cho, the youngest daughter of Cho Quan, the richest man in Hanam. It is worth noting that most of the grain and cotton produced in Hanam belonged to the Cho family. Here Soki pondered that the marriage with the Chigal family was a political deal and an alliance to maintain the balance of power. So the reason for marrying two others is to secure financial resources and food supplies, as well as control over the flow of goods. Tanchun nodded quite firmly. Such were the marriages in the Tan clan. Nevertheless, the wives of the clan leader were just as calculating as everyone in the Tan family, and could not miss out on profit. For all 3 wives of Mohyok, the main goal in life is to place their own child in the position of head and gain power in the Tan family. Soha's face darkened. It turns out that the problem is not so much in her existence as in the fact that she became a disciple of the Supreme Elder. And yet Soha should not have strained so much, because as long as Tanchun was nearby, no one in the Tan family could even touch her with a finger. Suddenly Tanchun decided to ask how far Soha had progressed in studying the 1,000-word text. Soha had nothing special to boast about, as she had advanced about 3/10. Then Tanchun asked her to try harder, because first Soha had to master literacy in order to learn everything that a member of the direct branch of the clan should know. Soha was extremely surprised. Wasn't her training only about mastering the art of poisons? Did she really have to know something else as a member of the direct branch? Nevertheless, Tanchun was determined, because for one who has grasped the essence of things, there is no difference between poison and medicine. To use poison correctly, one must first understand what medicine is. So first Soha had to study medicine. Of course Soha agreed with him, she just did not want to learn literacy. Tanchun noticed a change in Soha's behavior but completely misunderstood it, perceiving it as a loss of patience for the awaited training. Suddenly standing up, Tanchun said that they needed to return quickly so that Soha could master literacy as soon as possible. Soha was extremely surprised by this turn of events, since they had not even looked at the flowers. Nevertheless, she did not contradict the elder and accepted her fate with enthusiasm. Carefully descending onto the paved square, Tanchun said that it was about noon, and Soha still had enough time to study 1,000 hieroglyphs. So he was amazed at how exactly Tanchun was able to determine the time, deciding for herself that she would definitely ask him to teach her how to use the sundial. Then Tanchun turned around and headed in the direction opposite the house. He planned to walk a little more, and he ordered Sohi to return back. Looking at the departing teacher's back, Soha wondered how soon Tanchun would return. It was already quite late, so she decided to go set the table for now. When Tanchun returned, Sohi was already finishing arranging the steaming dishes. Seeing the teacher, she invited Tanchun to the table. Then Tanchun took out a note and a small pouch from under his cloak. This was in front of Sohi's quarters, so he reasonably assumed that these items belonged to her. But Sohi saw these things for the first time, yet Tanchun still handed her the pouch, which contained money. Nevertheless, Sohi was more interested in the note. Then Tanchun asked Sohi to wait and, unfolding the letter, began reading it first. Sohi wanted to ask what was in the letter, but without a word, Tanchun simply burned the message. Surprise appeared on Sohi's face. She finally saw the true fire of Samadhi. Even the ash from the paper remained neat. Tanchun, shaking his hands, asked Sohi to tell Huey not to dare climb over other people's walls anymore, because he could fall into traps set along the walls. Judging by what the elder said, Sohi guessed that the letter was from Huey, so nodding affirmatively, she promised to deliver the message to the young master as soon as she saw him again. And then Sohi wondered, if traps were set around, why does Tanchun climb over the walls? What if he himself falls into one of them? And as if reading her thoughts, Tanchun immediately replied that he knew the locations of all the traps, having lived in the Tan clan all his life. Soki looked at him fearfully. Could it be that grandfather used some secret technique? But it was much simpler. Tanchun just had to look at Soha's face to understand all her thoughts. Squinting cunningly, Tanchun suddenly asked if Sohi had really caught the eye of Huey from the Namgun family. So he was outraged. How Tanchun could think that anyone would love a snot-nosed kid like Huey. She still preferred those who were older. Too young Soki did not attract her at all. Satisfied with the answer, Tanchun smiled and then suggested to finally start the meal. It was already late when Soki left Tanchun and headed home. On the way, she struggled to hold the gifts in her hands, seriously wondering if she should have taken them all at once. Of course, she planned to share these snacks with her little sister Sonjji. Suddenly, Soha's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. It was Sonjji, who anxiously waited for her at the doorstep of their house, very worried about her friend since she had not returned home yesterday without saying anything. Sonjji immediately ran up to Soki and began questioning her about what had happened during these days. Tears welled up in Sonjji's eyes, for she had already imagined horrors that could have happened to her friend. Soki immediately apologized for her behavior, but Sonjji, wiping away tears, just waved her hand. The main thing was that her friend was safe. Suddenly, Soki remembered the gifts and handed Sonjji the tea tube that the elder Tanchun had given. Opening the tube, Sonjji was very surprised, for it was a very valuable Monjong tea. Noticing the confusion on her friend's face, Soki immediately explained that the tea was simply extra, so the elder gave it. Sonjji was satisfied with this answer, so she suggested having dinner together and went to boil water. Unexpectedly, Soki's attention was drawn to the new bed linen neatly resting on her bed. Noticing her friend's gaze, Sonjji immediately explained that Lady Jin had come yesterday, and since there was no room for moving in, she left the new bedding and left. Pouring tea into cups, Sonjji felt somewhat uneasy, for Soki had definitely caught Tanchun's eye. What was she planning to do next? It was rumored that if Tanchun summoned a new maid, she disappeared without a trace. Apparently, he had often been looking for spies before. But Soki was clearly not worried about this, for she was definitely not a spy, but quite the opposite. She was blood of the Tan family. However, she was more concerned about her half-brothers, so she decided to ask Sonjji what kind of person Master Yunho was. Sighing heavily, she replied that the young master was quite a bastard, but quickly stopped herself and looked around. Then, putting a finger to her lips, she asked not to tell anyone about this. Soki nodded understandingly in response. According to Sonjji, Yunho was completely unfit for the role of young master. Yunho was stupid, and not handsome either. Plus, he shamelessly mocked the maids. Even after 5 years of training under the deputy commander of the Black Cloud, Yunho still yielded to his brother, who was 4 years younger. And if Yunho becomes the head of the family in the future, then the Tang clan will definitely fall apart, and Sonjji was very worried about her future. Then Sohee became curious why exactly Yunho became the heir. Here Sonjji explained that the head of the family himself initially did not intend to appoint Yunho as the heir. It's just that the son of the main lady, Mr. Yoon, was ill with meridian blockage. Perhaps this was because Lady Jagal herself was weak in health. Everyone had long known the story that Lady Jagal and the head could not have an heir for 3 years after the wedding, so Lady Im was brought into the house, who gave birth to a son first, and Lady Cho, who came much later, had 2 sons and a daughter, while Lady Jagal only had Mr. Yoon, so she must have been very worried. Of course, as a woman, Sohee felt sorry for Lady Jagal, but this was the world of martial arts, so unfortunately she could not change anything. Here Sohee wondered how many brothers and sisters she actually had in the end, and why was it necessary to have so many children? Her thoughts were interrupted by Sonjji asking if she would study today. Of course, Sohee was not eager to learn, but the elder had ordered it. While clearing the table, Sonjji advised Sohee to study for an hour and then go to sleep. Sohee thanked her sister for the care. Taking the 1,000-word classic in her hands, Sohee was filled with determination, for she could not live her whole life illiterate. She set a goal to master the 1,000-word classic by the end of the month, but literally half an hour later, all of Sohee's determination evaporated. Since the day Sohee met the leader, Elder Tang had not appeared in the pavilion for 2 days. Nevertheless, although Tanchun was extremely irritated, he still went out to meet the head of the Peng clan, who had come to visit. Sohee was going to skip cleaning and do the cleaning herself, since she was supposed to be alone today anyway. But opening the door to Tangjun's house, she was surprised to find Yoon peacefully sipping tea. Sohee was horrified. In the daylight, Yoon looked even more ill. The color of the tips of his hair seemed to have faded. Could it really be because of the interrupted meridians? If so, when this color turns completely white, Yoon's life will end. Sohee shuddered. Thinking about such things in front of Yoon was very tactless. So, not knowing how to start the conversation, she looked around and noticed that Tangjun was not there now. But Yoon already knew this. Smiling, he invited Sohee to sit down. Actually, Tangjun had called him to help Sohee with her studies. Of course, Yoon was extremely surprised, since earlier Sohee had said she did not want to study. Nevertheless, he was glad that now he could correspond with his sister. At first, he wanted to find out how far Soki had progressed in learning the 1,000-word text, and Soki gladly handed him the notes. Carefully studying them, Yoon was satisfied with his sister's progress. Next, he wanted to look at her abilities. Suddenly, Soki's entire being literally screamed that she needed to run away from here immediately. Stepping out of the house, Soki stretched towards the rays of the midday sun. She was glad to finally be in the fresh air after the exhausting lesson. As soon as Soki learned even one character, Yoon immediately declared her the greatest prodigy in all of Sichuan. Of course, such praise embarrassed Soki greatly, but Yoon would immediately find 7 incorrectly written strokes and make her rewrite the entire character 20 times. At the same time, Yoon was incredibly picky about handwriting and made Soki rewrite the characters dozens of times, refusing to tolerate her scribbles. At one point, Soki even pleaded for mercy, but Yoon was unyielding and firmly stood his ground. However, the calligraphy exercise had to end when Yoon suddenly coughed up blood. Soki was very frightened, but Yoon just waved his hand and said everything was fine and not to pay attention to it. Nevertheless, his words did not calm Soki at all. Overall, the morning turned out to be quite something. Suddenly, Soki's thoughts were interrupted by Huey, who had been searching for her all this time. He was extremely upset that Soki did not come to the place specified in the letter, as he had been waiting for her all this time. Soki lowered her eyes guiltily. She was ashamed to speak, but she immediately explained that she simply could not read. This fact greatly surprised Huey. Afterwards, Soki conveyed the Elder Tan's warning about numerous traps set along the walls. Huey took the remark into account. Nevertheless, he still did not understand why she had not come to the appointed place. Soki immediately protested, concluding that Huey was not listening to her at all. Suddenly, Yoon appeared behind, interested in which family Huey belonged to and what he was doing here. Huey was confused and hesitated. Since Yoon had no strength to stand outside, he suggested going inside to talk. And although a good-natured smile played on Yoon's face, nevertheless the aura emanating from him was quite frightening. Having gone inside, all three sat down at the table and began drinking tea. Smiling kindly, Yoon asked if the guest liked the tea. Hui, without thinking, blurted out that the tea was excellent, although he did not touch the cup himself. It seemed that the answer quite satisfied Yoon, but the sinister aura was still present, although a smile still shone on his face. Lowering his head, Hui apologized for his unexpected visit. And so he thought to herself, this is what happens when someone recklessly jumps on the walls in other people's houses. Nevertheless, Yoon wanted to know which family the uninvited guest belonged to, and volunteered to personally escort Hui to the guest hall where she was accommodated. So he expected something like this from a member of the Tang clan. If Hui had known that everything would turn out this way, he would not have penetrated the residence of the Supreme Elder. Of course, so he understood that if the situation got out of control, she would also be involved, so she decided to help Hui a little. Without hesitation, she stated that she herself had invited Hui to play at the Tangjong house, since he was not supposed to be home all day today. So he fully took the blame for what happened and asked to punish her instead of Hui. Yoon was extremely surprised to hear that his sister had a friend. He clearly had doubts, but Soki confidently continued to stand her ground, telling how they had accidentally met and become friends a couple of days ago, and how they went to the market together, and it was there that they agreed to meet. Soki spoke so confidently that Yoon's defense cracked and doubts began to gradually dissipate. For emphasis, Soki nudged Huey with her shoulder, and he actively nodded his head, confirming every word she said. In the end, Yoon still gave in, deciding that he had misunderstood the situation, and although Huey was Soki's friend, nevertheless he should immediately return to his family's quarters. At that moment, Huey jumped up from the table and, thanking for the hospitality, was about to fulfill the request. But Soki also stood up from the table, declaring that she would see the guest off. A cup of tea crashed down on the table with such a bang that it cracked into 2 halves. With the same good-natured smile on his face, Yoon was also going to accompany Huey. But Soki was not confused, and quickly catching the shocked Huey, rushed out with him onto the street, throwing a farewell so that her brother would not worry. She thought that Yoon was the most gentle person in the Tang clan, but she was very wrong. Like everyone in the Tang family, he had a bad temper. Finally finding themselves on the street, they were able to catch their breath. Huey was still a little out of sorts. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest. Nevertheless, Soki considered it a good lesson for Huey. From now on, he would think twice before bursting into a house unfamiliar to him. Coming to his senses, Huey thanked Soki for calling him a friend, because if Yoon found out that he was from the Namun clan, it would have tarnished his honor. Sighing heavily, Soki asked him not to repeat such mistakes in the future. Huey apologized once again for what happened, as he could not have imagined that things would go so far. He also asked Soki not to worry about the letter, since there was nothing serious in it. To which Soki repeated again that she could not read. So even if Huey sent her a letter again, she would not be able to read it. Of course, Huey did not believe this, since Soki's hands were stained with ink just like a couple of days ago. She looked at her hands fearfully and immediately began to wipe them. Huey continued to insist that since Soki was learning literacy, she was obliged to reply to his next letter. But she protested again that she could not read, and was only studying the 1,000-character classic. Waving goodbye, Huey said at last that Soki should not rush, and should finish her studies before replying to his letter. But Soki was skeptical. It would take quite some time before she fully mastered this knowledge, and in principle, she did not intend to reply to Huey. Finally, the first day of the long-awaited meeting of the 5 great families arrived. Of course, it was good that the meeting was held so close, but the elder Tanchun ordered Soki not to show herself. Nevertheless, she was immediately sent to the banquet hall where all the guests were gathering. Perhaps Lady Jin wanted to take care of Soki in her own way, since she only had to serve tea to the guests. Nevertheless, Soki was anxious that her father might notice her. But perhaps it was for the best, since the banquet hall was quite large, and if Soki hid, she might not be noticed. Meanwhile, Lady Jin was giving the final instructions before the guests arrived, warning the servants that if even one silver plate disappeared, they would all be punished. Looking around, Soki noticed that Simyan from Shenyang also worked in the banquet hall. She stared intently at Soki and passed by. Soki thought to herself that Simyan should focus on fulfilling her duties instead of exposing herself to her. Because of her thoughts, Soki almost forgot that she needed to find a place to hide. She quickly rushed off to search. Finally, the guests began to arrive, which meant that the meeting of the 5 great families was about to start soon. Soki decided to hide behind a column near the Moheon family table. Suddenly, she heard a familiar laugh. It was Yoon's brother who, accompanied by a girl in red named Ju Si, passed by laughing cheerfully. Yoon glanced at Soki secretly, but did not show that they knew each other, understanding the situation she was in. Soki sighed with relief. Carefully examining the girl, Soki wondered if this was really her stepsister Tang Ju Si. Of course, Soki did not know what she was really like, but by her appearance, it seemed that Ju was a spoiled girl with a bad temper. Suddenly, a blonde girl addressed Soki. Her name was Moheon Soye, and she wanted to know if she could sit here. Smiling kindly, Soki pointed to a place where the girl could sit, and she comfortably settled at a small table, ready to start the meal. But suddenly, a worried voice called out to her, calling the girl Yeye. It was Soye's father, who was extremely concerned that his daughter categorically refused to accept his help. Soye was outraged. After all, she was already 8 years old and could sit on a chair by herself. Moreover, she asked her father not to call her by her childish name. After all, they were not at home and others would scold him for excessive love for the child. But her father was not at all embarrassed by this, and he kissed Soye on the cheek, who, blushing, began to protest fiercely. From the very beginning, Soki was curious about who would represent the Moheon family. It turned out the young master was named Moheon Ki, and this was his only daughter Soye, in whom he was very fond. Suddenly, Soki noticed among the guests Tanchun, and at that moment a voice seemed to sound in her head, clearly indignant that she had disobeyed the order. At first, Soki was very frightened by the voice in her head, but it turned out to be Tanchun, who was communicating with her through thought transmission. He immediately ordered Soki to stand still and not try to respond. He also wanted Soki to try to avoid being noticed by Muhyoku as much as possible. Unexpectedly, Soye jumped up from the table and, pointing at Tanchun, declared that she would marry this gentleman from the Tan clan. The guests in the banquet hall instantly fell silent and began whispering among themselves. Tanchun abruptly stopped, not fully understanding what was happening. Moheon Ki, who was also shocked by his daughter's statement, quickly came to his senses and tried to explain to Soye that it was impossible, since Tanchun was the supreme elder of the Tan clan, and moreover his age was quite respectable. But Soye was not going to give up. She had not heard of a law forbidding supreme elders to marry. Besides, she did not intend to live 1,000 years, so age was not an obstacle for her. Finally understanding what was happening, Tanchun wearily rubbed his temples and asked Lady Moheon Soye to look for a more suitable candidate for a husband. Suddenly, a man of sturdy build laughed loudly from behind. He was teasing Tanchun that he was chosen as a husband by an 8-year-old girl. Tanchun looked sternly towards the man, who was an elder from the Peng clan. Nevertheless, the laughter not only did not stop, but even grew louder. Suddenly, Penek, as the elder was called, stopped laughing and skillfully caught the kunai thrown by Tanchun. He immediately burst out with an angry bravado towards Tanchun, asking what kind of manners were those to throw weapons at guests. But Tanchun just waved his hand and replied that it was simply a greeting. Then Tanchun asked what Penek had been doing all this time. To which he good-naturedly smiled and answered that he was making himself a coffin, since his build was not small. Suddenly, clearing his throat, Mohyok spoke up, announcing the start of the feast and wishing everyone present a good time. Sohee, who was watching everything from the side, was extremely surprised, as she considered this an official event, but it looked more like a farce. Some time later, Sohee humbly followed Tanchun and Pennek to the chambers of the Supreme Elder, and although she was grateful to Tanchun for leading her out of the event, he did it so openly that perhaps Mohyok noticed them. Suddenly, Pennek decided to ask if Tanchun was leading him to his dusty hole, to which he retorted that Sohee had just cleaned it up yesterday. Pennek turned around, and looking at Sohee, asked Tanchun if he really remembered the names of all the maidservants. Suddenly his eyes widened in surprise, and then he suggested that perhaps Sohee was the granddaughter of Huayon's sister? But then she would not be dressed as a maid. Tanchun immediately stated that Sohee has no relation to Huon. Nevertheless, Pennek stood his ground, as Sohee looked very much like her. But Tanchun assured him that he himself was initially surprised and even touched Sohee twice, first thinking that she was a spy wearing a mask made of human skin. All this time, Sohee silently endured on the sidelines, but she was extremely worried about the unknown Huon, about whom everyone kept talking. Suddenly, Pennek angrily declared that it was in bad taste to try to see a dead person in a living one, to which Tanchun confidently replied that he was not trying to. Then Pennek asked Tanchun why he kept a child so similar to his deceased sister with him. At the mention of these words, a chill ran down Sohee's spine. So that's why Tanchun took her as a disciple? Unexpectedly, she remembered that Tanchun had already mentioned Huon in conversation. Then Sohee felt that he saw someone else in her. And then Sohee wondered, could it be that she was treated specially as a replacement for the dead? Then it was no wonder that Tanchun treated her so well. Suddenly Tanchun demanded that Pennek immediately stop babbling, since Sohee had heard everything. Then Tanchun asked Sohee to come closer, and she obediently bowed her head and fulfilled the request. As soon as Sohee came closer, Tanchun instantly created a sound-absorbing barrier. Pennek was very surprised, wondering what his old friend wanted to say that he decided to use the barrier. As soon as the barrier fully covered them, Tanchun explained that Sohee is the youngest daughter of Mohyok, whom he kept on the side, and for some reasons she is not yet recognized as part of the main family. As soon as Pennek realized that the granddaughter of Tanchun was in front of him, he immediately apologized for his behavior and properly scolded himself. Nevertheless, Sohee replied that there was nothing terrible about it, and asked Pennek not to blame himself. Pennek, ruffling Sohee's hair, promised to arrange a lavish reception as an apology as soon as she visited him. Tanchun was outraged, asking why Pennek was pulling the hair of his precious granddaughter, and struck him on the hand with all his might. Of course, Pennek was taken aback by such impudence, but still decided to ask if Sohee was all right. She smiled and nodded affirmatively. Gently taking Sohee by the hand, Tanchun suggested continuing the journey and promised to tell her an old story as soon as they returned. Since Pennek felt heavy from a couple of pieces of meat, he coughed and decided to go for a walk so that the food would settle properly, and immediately disappeared from sight. Of course, Tanchun understood that this was just an excuse for him and Sohee to be alone. Slowly continuing the journey, Tanchun unexpectedly asked if Sohee was interested in knowing who Huon was. She nodded affirmatively in response. Then Tanchun said that Huon was his younger sister, who left this world at approximately the same age Sohee was now. Huon was a talented and brave girl, a restless one, just like Sohee, whose every thought was written on her face. Only Huon could not study the martial arts of the Tan clan. Her marriage was decided even when she was in her mother's womb. Huon was to be married off in Hubei. It was a very important engagement. The family did not teach Huon anything except the basics, as she was supposed to marry and leave the clan. Nevertheless, she did not give up. Huon followed Tanchun every day and begged him to teach her the art of poisons. But out of his foolishness, Tanchun believed he could not break the strict family laws and did not fulfill Huon's request. At 16, Huon left the family, entering into an arranged marriage. Then news reached Tanchun that Huon died in childbirth. Neither the child nor the mother survived. At that time, Tanchun was wandering the world of martial arts, so he learned about everything very late. He could not even see his sister off on her final journey. In Tanchun's opinion, if Huon had even a little knowledge of martial arts, she would not have died so needlessly. Tanchun still regretted this, although now these were only senile memories. Gently taking Tanchun's hand, Sohee apologized, as she did not know what had happened to him. But Tanchun did not think Sohee was to blame for anything. He was the one who should apologize, as he was the one who created such an awkward situation. Tears burst from Sohee's eyes, and Tanchun hugged his granddaughter tightly. Of course, At first she caught his attention because she resembled Huon. Therefore, he thought that if Huon had a daughter, she would be just like Sohee. Nevertheless, Tanchun did not want her to live differently from Huon. Wasn't one person whose talents were wasted because of all these rules enough? So he believed that there was no need to blame the elder, because if you think about it, she herself perceived him only as a character from a novel. They simply did not truly look at each other. Smiling kindly, Sohee said that everything was fine, because Tanchun had told her everything honestly. But Tanchun clearly understood that even if Sohee said so, she was still hurt. Suddenly behind them, Penak appeared again, having returned from a walk. In his opinion, Tanchun simply wanted at least Sohee to be free from these prejudices. Nevertheless, he believed that Sohee did not need to endure all the whims of this old man and just listened to him half-heartedly, letting the remarks go in one ear and out the other. Gently tousling Sohee's hair again, Penak advised her not to feel obligated, but simply to try to live her life well. Tanchun watched everything happening with a stern look. Of course, he did not like Penak's words directed at him, but nevertheless he agreed with him. And since the talking was over, Penak finally suggested getting down to business. Sohee was very surprised by these words, as she did not understand what important business they were supposed to engage in. In fact, the important business turned out to be drinking, because it was precisely to drink in company that Penak and Tanchun had actually left the event. Comfortably settled at the table, Penak carefully examined Tanchun's dwelling and, to his surprise, noted that there was no poisonous smoke in his wolf's den. Of course, Tanchun was outraged by such statements, but Penak immediately explained his position, because in his house there were always some herbs laid out that were needed for making poisons. Nevertheless, these words did not convince Tanchun, and he, glaring fiercely, pulled throwing needles from his sleeve. Penak understood what was going on and immediately apologized. On the face of Sohee, who was watching everything happening, a good-natured smile played. It seemed Penak had been badly affected by the elder's poison. Sliding the plate with seafood closer to himself, Penak suddenly asked how Yun was doing and if there were any improvements. To which Tanchun replied that Lady Jegal was desperately searching for miraculous medicines, but Yun's condition was not improving. In his opinion, Yun had 1 or 2 years left to live, no more. Then Penak asked if Yun had been shown to the divine doctor with the demon hand. Tanchun spoke with him, although he considered him capricious. The doctor came to Chengdu as if intending to help, but he only idled around and then suddenly left for Wuhan. Of course, Tanchun knew about the doctor's iron rule, not to create unnecessary trouble for himself. And helping Yun meant getting involved in the struggle for inheritance in the Tan clan, so the doctor's escape was quite expected. And then Sohee, who was setting the table, thought that being a doctor in the world of martial arts was a very difficult job. You save a person and then you can easily end up on the wrong side. She tried to remember if a doctor nicknamed Demon Hand was mentioned in the novel. And fortunately, Sohee managed to recall that in the novel Namgunhueyu found the secret cave of the divine doctor with the demon hand. The lake cave, located in a deep mountain valley, miraculously filled and drained every half-month. If at that time you descended to the bottom of the lake, a secret cave hidden by the divine doctor would appear. In the novel, it was written that Namgunhui found the legacy left by the immortal. So Sohee concluded that the divine doctor who was in the novel is still alive. Like thunder out of a clear sky, the thought flashed through Sohee's mind. Could such a master as the divine doctor not cure Yun's meridian blockage? But Sohee immediately realized that most likely the doctor would not treat Yun because of the internal struggle within the Tang clan. And then a plan arose in her mind. What if she cleaned out the secret cave? After all, in the novel Hui found a bunch of precious elixirs and potions there, increasing his internal strength. Surely there must have been at least something in the cave that could help Yun's brother. However, if she pulled off this trick with the elder, Sohee would start being questioned suspiciously about how she knew about it. Sighing heavily, Sohee discarded this idea, since she didn't even know where that very lake was located. Penak immediately noticed the change in her mood and did not fail to inquire. Tanchun, on the other hand, suggested that Sohee was simply worried about her sworn brother. Taking a sip, he advised Sohee to go study while he and Penak drank. But Penak immediately objected that Tanchun was forcing Sohee to study even on such a day. Moving the neighboring chair closer, Penak kindly invited Sohee to sit next to him. At first she was a little embarrassed, but seeing an approving nod from Tanchun, she happily sat on the indicated chair. Penak felt guilty about what had recently happened, so he decided to give a gift. Having asked Sohee to carefully keep the gift, he pulled out from under his coat a round plaque with his name on it. If Sohee ever needed Penak's help, it was enough to simply bring the plaque to the Pan clan. Even if Sohee was not in Hebei, it was enough to show the plaque to any member of the Pan clan, and they would take care of her. Soki gratefully accepted the gift. Tanchun did not stop Pennak, but doubted whether it was the right occasion to give away the jade plaque. Nevertheless, Pennak believed the reason was quite weighty, since he had almost made his friend's beloved granddaughter cry, so it was the least he could do. Then Tanchun decided to tell Soki exactly what she had received as a gift. It was a jade plaque given as a sign of a promise to repay a great favor in the future. Even if Pennak died, the promise would remain in effect. Nodding affirmatively, Pennak laughed loudly. Everything was correct, but the plaque could only be used once, so it was worth saving it for the right moment. Thanking for such a valuable gift, Soki looked joyfully at the jade plaque again, and then unexpectedly asked Pennak why a tiger was engraved on it. This question puzzled Pennak greatly, so he suggested that Tanchun tell the granddaughter a little about the Pan clan. But Tanchun was not very eager to do so he simply called the Pan clan ignorant brutes who only waved swords around. Pennak naturally took offense and decided to tell the story himself. There was no special reason for the image of the tiger. The Pan clan was simply called the Tigers of Hebei. Probably that's why they engraved a tiger on the plaque for the sake of empty formalities, to make it look cooler. But Tanchun was dissatisfied with such an explanation. How was his granddaughter supposed to understand what it was about if Pennak told it so carelessly? Therefore, he explained that in reality, it was because of the martial arts of the Pen clan. They have many techniques imitating the movements of a fierce tiger. That is exactly why the clan has been called that since ancient times. Moreover, Pennak's nickname was Emperor of the Fierce Tiger Sword. So he looked at Pennak with delight, who shone with praise. In his time he was quite famous, so he decided to talk about his youth. Only now did Sohi realize with horror that she had fallen into the trap of, "but in our time." She looked at Tanchun pleadingly, showing with her whole appearance that she was ready to go study, but he didn't even raise an eyebrow. Since there was no chance to escape, so he decided that since she had received the jade plaque, it would be good if she properly played the role of a grateful granddaughter. Simyan angrily threw the apron on the floor. How dare Sohi show up at the banquet with her status? She pretends to be a noble lady, although she is just as much a servant as she is. Simyan believed that Sohi decided to improve her fate by trading on her face. Of course, if she successfully married a young master, she could secure her future. Naturally, Simyan was irritated to death by how Sohi fluttered around the young master Tang Yun, whereas before she couldn't even utter a word. Sohi had hoped this time to work somewhere else, but she was called to the banquet hall again. Of course, she was curious why Lady Qin constantly summoned her to the banquet hall. She did not know the exact answer, but she assumed that this was how Mrs. Qin hoped to find her a suitor. Although, to judge reasonably, what son of a noble family would marry a servant? Nevertheless, Soki decided not to dwell on this topic and to fulfill her duties as required. Unaware of it herself, Soki approached Huey's table, who joyfully extended his cup and asked her to fill it quickly. Everyone around was twice as excited as usual. However, Soki understood why. Not every day do you witness a marriage proposal from an 8-year-old girl. Watching intently as Sohi once again asked Tanchun to marry her, Soki did not notice how Huey tugged her sleeve and suggested she sit next to him. Waving her hands, Soki immediately protested, saying what was the young master thinking, risking his own head. Where has it been seen that a servant sits at the same table with the masters? Huey hung his head gloomily. Soki immediately became worried whether he was offended by her refusal, or if it sounded too harsh. Of course, she perfectly understood that if she sat next to Huey, she might lose her life, so there was nothing to be done. Suddenly, raised voices were heard, and one of the vases shattered into pieces, falling to the floor, which frightened Soki greatly. What kind of banquet is this where guests are constantly noisy? The source of the noise was Tan Yongho, who was insulted by the words of one of the Jegal clan and, grabbing him by the robe, demanded explanations. A representative of the Jegal clan named Hyogen tried to smooth the situation by stating that Yongho had misunderstood his words. He had only quoted a sage. But Yongho believed that Hyogen despised him, and his words spoke of Yongho's unsuitability for the role of young head and called for him to leave this position. Mukyok intervened in the scuffle, immediately demanding that Yonho release Hyogan. Despite the order from the head of his clan, Yonho was not in a hurry to release the insolent one. On the contrary, he shook Hyogan with all his might. Then the head of the Jegal clan decided to intervene. He was extremely outraged that Mukyok, as the head of the Tan clan, showed such disrespect through the behavior of his subordinate. Of course, Mukyok tried to smooth things over, hastily apologizing. He decided not to escalate the situation over a childish quarrel and again demanded that Yonho release Hyogan. Gritting his teeth, Yonho apologized, which sounded insincere, and still, after releasing the representative of the Jegal clan, he immediately left. In the mind of Tanchun, who was closely watching the conflict, the question arose: how does Yonho intend to lead the family into the future if he cannot control his own feelings? The head of the Chaegul clan, glaring fiercely at Hyogen, ordered him not to provoke Yonho anymore, to which Hyogen, putting on a look of surprise, said that he was only discussing Laozi with the young head Yonho, nothing more. At this point, Mukyok allowed himself a sharp remark towards Hyogen. He wanted Hyogen not to bring trouble with words, but to prove everything with actions. Smiling kindly, Hyogen thanked the head of the Tan clan for the advice. Then he apologized to the guests for the noise caused, and asked them to ignore him and continue enjoying the banquet. So he was amazed by this outcome. In their family, Yonho usually caused problems, but in the Jagal family, it seemed the problems were caused by the nephew of the head, Hyogen. The atmosphere at this banquet was completely spoiled, but nothing surprising, since Yonho himself ruined the evening. Therefore, Sohee sincerely hoped that the banquet would be dismissed, and she would have the opportunity to slip away from here as far as possible. Tanchun, noticing a glimmer of hope on Sohee's face, hinted with his entire gaze that she should behave properly. All this time, Huey sat as if on pins and needles, which was immediately noticed by the elder Namgun, who asked his son if everything was all right with him. He only nodded affirmatively. Then Huey suddenly asked Sohee to accompany him to the restroom. She was a little confused at first, but still managed to pull herself together and, pointing the way, followed alongside Huey. Stepping out into the fresh air, Sohee was very surprised. Huey himself had asked to be accompanied, so why did he go ahead? Nevertheless, she still decided to hint to Huey that the restroom was actually in the other direction. But he, turning around unexpectedly, said that there was no need to go to the restroom anymore. Then, smiling kindly, he explained that it was Tanchun who told him to take Sohee out for an hour. Sohee's eyes widened in surprise. It turned out the trip to the restroom was just a pretext to take her away from the banquet. Sohee was touched. Could it be that Tanchun noticed she was very tired and in this way gave her time to rest? And since it turned out that way, Huey asked Sohee if she knew any place where they could pass the time. And then Sohee thought she did not particularly know any places where she could take Namgun Huey. Suddenly an idea flashed in her mind. What if she took the young gentleman to the Hogawan Garden? The Hogawan Garden was carefully arranged as a backyard for the guests staying in the guest house. Stepping out onto the second-floor terrace, Huey was breathless from the beauty of the view. Skillfully catching a cherry blossom petal in midair, he quoted a line from a very famous poem, which greatly surprised Sohee. Then Huey quickly jumped over the railing, sat on the banister, and invited Sohee to follow his example. She laughed brightly and sat down next to him. Of course, sitting close was a bit awkward for Sohee, but there was no one else nearby, so she allowed herself to relax. Her gaze opened to a truly stunning view. Sohee did not even notice when spring arrived. A soft, warm breeze stirred her hair. Sohee closed her eyes in pleasure and relaxed so much that she did not notice when one shoe slipped off her foot and flew into the water. The splash of water snapped Sohee out of oblivion, and with horror she realized what had happened. She began to frantically think about how to retrieve the shoe from the water. But Huey, not letting Sohee think it over, jumped down from the railing without a word and rushed after the shoe into the water. Of course, Sohee tried to stop him, since the young gentleman could catch a cold. She would have retrieved the lost shoe later herself. It was not worth the risk. By the time Sohee went down to the first floor, Huey had already managed to get out of the water. He was soaked to the bone but still pleased with himself because he had succeeded in retrieving the shoe. Huey knelt before Sohee on one knee. She was horrified and immediately began to protest. But Huey asked her to stand still and not move. A woman was not allowed to show her bare feet to a man she barely knew, and Huey knew this well. Carefully wrapping the foot with a handkerchief, he put a shoe on Sohee's foot. Although Sohee felt pleased, she still scolded Huey, saying he shouldn't be so kind to everyone indiscriminately, as he might be misunderstood. Surprised, Huey tried to object that his father always puts shoes on his mother, but Sohee immediately stated that they were husband and wife. This was something Huey had not considered. To herself, Sohee noted that unlike his appearance, the head of the Namgun clan seemed to be a model family man. Realizing what had just happened, Huey blushed. Embarrassed, turning away, he whispered something quietly. Sohee did not hear what exactly Huey said, so she asked him to repeat it. But unexpectedly, Huey declared that it was a secret. In any case, Sohee thought that Huey should change clothes since he was soaked through, so she suggested using the guest house nearby. Strangely, Huey agreed with her, because if people saw him like that, they would laugh, saying he was just playing in the water, and that was not dignified. A joyful smile lit up Sohee's face. It was definitely the right decision. Nevertheless, she was pleased that she had been able to convince Huey so easily. Suddenly, Huey took her by the edge of her dress and, smiling, asked if Soki would go with him to the guest house. She smiled and nodded affirmatively. Fortunately, there was no one in the guest house, so Hui was glad he wouldn't have to show himself to anyone in a wet state. To her surprise, Soki noticed that Huey changed clothes at lightning speed. It was clear that this was not his first time. Since the changing was done, Soki decided to ask if it was time for them to return to the banquet hall. Huey nodded affirmatively. After all, an hour had already passed. On the way back, Huey suddenly asked what Soki planned to do tomorrow. Of course, Soki did not know for sure, but she guessed that more tasks awaited her tomorrow. Huey thought that Soki was joking with him, but she was quite serious. She would also have to work tomorrow. Realizing this, Huey became sad. Of course, Soki noticed this, but she could not just quit her job. Suddenly, their path was blocked by a girl dressed as a maid. Apologizing to the young master, she stated that they were short-handed and asked if she could take Soki away. But Huey refused quite sharply. Naturally, Soki understood that one should not refuse so abruptly when asked for help. So smiling, she said that everything was fine and asked Huey to go ahead. Huey was clearly displeased with this turn of events. Nevertheless, he agreed, asking Soki to return as soon as possible. As soon as Huey disappeared from sight, the maid's tone changed sharply and she ordered Soki to follow her. Soki was a little confused, so she decided to ask where they were going. But the maid answered rather rudely, telling Soki not to ask stupid questions and just follow her. The maid's face seemed familiar to Soki. Perhaps she was from the Simyan gang. Therefore, Soki mentally prepared herself that, as last time, she would be taken somewhere and tormented. As soon as Soki turned the corner, she was immediately doused with slops, and a wooden bucket crashed onto the pavement. Opening her eyes, to her surprise, she found Simyan with 2 more maids. She looked down arrogantly at Soki. Simyan accused Soki of wagging her tail before the young master Huon, and now even seducing the young clan head Namun. Simyan also demanded an immediate explanation of what fox trick Soki used that made the young head even change clothes. To which Soki coldly asked where Simyan learned such idiotic antics of grabbing passers-by and pouring slops on them. Simyan was shocked by such resistance, and immediately screamed that Soki brazenly snatched a chance that comes once every 5 years, since today Asui was supposed to go to the feast, not her. But Soki frankly didn't care. If Asui wanted so much, then let her go. Pouring slops on someone over such nonsense? Ridiculous. Could it be that slaves decided to compete over whose collar shines brighter? Here Asui, who stood behind, could not endure the humiliation and exclaimed that she receives lawful pay for her work. Anger so seized Asui that she raised her palm intending to give Soki a good slap so that she would finally watch her tongue. But Soki was not going to tolerate it and hit Asui's hand. Where has it been seen that commoners would lay hands on others? With a scream, Asui fell onto the pavement holding her hand. Her friends immediately protested how Soki dared to do such a thing. But Soki herself did not know what came over her and stared at her hand in surprise. Could it be that she just did that? Here, Simyan stepped forward and, calling Soki a homeless orphan, accused her of attacking a person from the Tang clan. Suddenly, Soki was outraged and asked who Simyan was to throw accusations so easily. She was definitely not a daughter of the Tang clan, so she had no rights. Simyan blushed with shame, but nevertheless tried to argue that her mother actually belonged to the Tang clan. But Soki easily countered this argument, reminding that Simyan was not even given the Tan surname, so she did not belong to the clan. So why was she pretending to have any relation? These accusations so angered Simyan that without hesitation she pulled a knife from her robe and pointed it at Soki. She was not going to tolerate this. Nevertheless, Soki was not only unafraid, but on the contrary took a step forward. She became curious about what Simyan intended to do. Simyan just wanted to disfigure Soki's face so she could no longer be arrogant and seduce high-ranking individuals. In response, a malicious smile played on Soki's face, and taking another step forward, she put her neck and face under the knife. If Simyan was really so brave, then let her try to slash the neck or face. Simyan's hands trembled with excitement, but anger so possessed her that she took these words as an insult and cut Soki on the left cheek. Scarlet blood immediately poured from the wound. Simyan's friends screamed in horror, and Soki, only smiling, asked if Simyan could handle the consequences. After all, she herself had just raised her hand against a person from the Tan clan. But Simyan no longer controlled herself. With wild screams, waving the knife, she rushed at Soki. But this time Soki was not going to deliberately expose herself. Suddenly Simyan's hand was stopped by Gyunmyeon, who seemed to have appeared out of the ground. He was nearby and rushed over at the noise. Seeing the 7th elder, Simyan dropped the knife out of fright. Gyunmyeon was extremely outraged that the maids had caused a vulgar brawl. Did they really intend to disgrace the Tang clan's name? Simyan tried to argue that they were just teaching the ill-mannered girl some manners. But Gyeonmyeon gave Simyan a stern look. She had clearly overstepped her authority. All three lowered their eyes guiltily. They knew well what punishment awaited those who harmed the household members. Gyeonmyeon ordered all three to immediately return to their duties and said he would personally report today's incident to the manager. Simyan and her friends bowed their heads, then quickly turned and left. As soon as they disappeared from sight, Gyeonmyeon handed Sohee his handkerchief so she could at least wipe her face. She accepted it gratefully. Gyeonmyeon also asked Sohee not to cause any more trouble for Master Tanchun, as he already had enough tiresome matters. Nervously laughing, Sohee asked Gyeonmyeon hopefully if the incident could be kept secret from the elder. Gyeonmyeon briefly replied that it could not, then turned and left without saying another word. At that moment, Sohee realized she was doomed. After changing into clean clothes, Sohee encountered problems. The outfit was a bit short and her bare legs were somewhat visible. Nevertheless, Sohee was grateful to Kyung-ae for providing the outfit and for bringing water with calamus decoction so she could wash. Although at their first meeting in the annex she had mistaken Sohee for a ghost and was very frightened. After calming down a bit, she decided to help. Sohee thanked Kyung-ae once again, as everyone avoided her and said she was dirty. And if Kyung-ae hadn't helped, Sohee would have remained in an unsightly state. Kyung-ae began to boil with indignation. She was upset about the situation that happened to Sohee, and also disliked Simyan and her retinue, as they constantly pushed Kyung-ae and called her names. Suddenly, Sohee noticed that the palm of Kyung-ae's right hand was scraped and immediately offered to bring a good ointment from her chambers. In response, Kyung-ae nodded happily. Unexpectedly, a familiar voice reached Sohee. It was Sanji, who was desperately looking for her friend. Finally finding her, Sanji was very surprised. Could it be that Sohee had already bathed? Nevertheless, she said that Sohee was being sought by Master Tanchun. A chill ran down Sohee's spine. Probably the seventh elder had already reported what had happened. Carefully knocking, Sohee stepped over the threshold of the house. She still hoped that despite what happened, Tanchun would not scold her too harshly. Tanchun was busy wiping priceless white porcelain and without looking up began to reprimand Sohee, as he had only allowed her to walk for an hour, but she had managed to get into trouble. Of course, Sohee did not do it on purpose, but she still apologized. Fortunately, Gyeongmyeon was passing by. When Tanchun finally looked up, he immediately fell silent, and a white porcelain cup flew to the floor. Sohee jumped up in fright, as it was the last white porcelain cup, and Tanchun valued it very much. Nevertheless, Tanchun paid no attention to the remarks. He quickly rushed to Sohee and examined the cut on her left cheek. Tanchun boiled with anger. Who dared to touch the precious face of his granddaughter? He was ready to tear the scoundrel to pieces. Only now did Sohee remember the wound on her cheek. So many events had happened in such a short period of time that she had completely forgotten about it. Sighing heavily, Tanchun began scolding his granddaughter again, then asked what had happened to her beautiful little face. Sohee decided to avoid a direct answer, and, spinning cheerfully, declared that she was perfectly fine, only her face had suffered a little. Of course, Tanchun knew that a scar might remain, so he first decided to apply medicine to the wound. In Tanchun's opinion, Sohee was too kind to others, and that's why she was constantly getting hurt. He carefully scooped ointment from the jar and began treating the wound. Sohee grimaced. It wasn't so much pain as unpleasant. Nevertheless, Sohee disagreed with the elder, since she had also hit back. Slamming the lid shut sharply, Tanchun declared that it was better for Sohee to cause trouble than to allow anyone to beat her up. Sohee reminded him again that she had also hit back, but Tanchun was not satisfied with that. He intended to teach his granddaughter hand-to-hand combat since the opportunity had arisen. Sitting on a chair, Sohee repeated where all the mahel were located as Tanchun had explained. A mahel is a pressure point, pressing which causes numbness of the body. On the shoulder it was kogol, at the back of the neck chonju, on the arm pyu, on the palm hog, under the knee winjun, and on the foot konsong. Tanchun was pleased with his granddaughter's answer, since it would be difficult for Sohee to accurately press the points for now, so he advised simply kicking the opponent on these mahel with full force, and Tanchun promised to personally deal with all possible consequences. Sohee nodded affirmatively in agreement. Also, Tanchun allowed Sohee not to go to the evening feast. Gyeonmyeon had to sort everything out. Of course, Sohee was grateful, but wasn't grandfather planning to go to the feast himself? But Tanchun thought that since he had appeared at the reception several times, that was more than enough. Suddenly remembering something, Tanchun sharply rushed to the wardrobe and began throwing out things in search of what, in his opinion, would allow Sohee to avoid beatings. Finally finding the necessary item, Tanchun smiled joyfully and asked Sohee to extend her hand. Although Soki was worried, she still fulfilled the request, and Tanchun carefully put a bracelet of elegant design on her wrist. Then Tanchun directed the hand with the bracelet towards the wall and pressed on a recess on it. Immediately a needle flew out of the bracelet and stuck in the wall. Tanchun smiled contentedly, and Soki stared at the bracelet in bewilderment. Could it be that only a needle had just flown out of it? Noticing the confusion on his granddaughter's face, Tanchun decided that she did not like the gift. Nevertheless, he asked Soki to accept the bracelet, and he would look for something prettier. But Soki immediately protested. In fact, she really liked the gift. She was just a little surprised, that's all. A little embarrassed, Tanchun explained that the needles contained a weak poison and asked Soki to always wear the bracelet, as it might come in handy in an unforeseen situation. When the formalities were over, Tanchun asked if she would stay for dinner. Soki was already quite hungry, so she did not refuse. To Soki's surprise, Tanchun asked to invite Huey, who had long been loitering on the street in front of the house and was very annoying him. As it turned out, Namgun Huey was indeed nervously pacing back and forth in front of the elder's house. It was already quite dark outside, so he grabbed a lantern and went outside to ask what Huey was doing here. In fact, Huey was looking for Sohee, so he came to the elder's house hoping to find her there. Noticing the wound on Sohee's cheek, Huey immediately asked if she was okay, but she just waved her hand and replied that it was just a scratch. Remembering Tanchung's request, Sohee suggested that Huey come in and have dinner with them. Pale, Huey tactfully declined. Apparently he did not like the idea very much. Noticing this, Sohee offered to escort him to the guest house, but Huey immediately protested, saying he already knew the way and would go by himself. A little embarrassed, Huey unexpectedly asked if Sohee wanted to go to the market with him tomorrow. According to rumors, the largest night market in Sichuan had opened in the Chengdu area, and Huey really wanted to see it before returning to Anhui. At first, Sohee was a little confused. It was so unexpected. In principle, she was not against it, but she wanted to ask for permission first. Suddenly, Tanchun appeared between them, having heard everything. And although he was not very warm toward Huey, he still allowed Sohee to go with him. Afterwards, Tanchun gave Huey a stern look and, once he finished all his business, ordered him to leave immediately. He still needed to feed Sohee. Understanding that they did not have much time left, Soki suggested meeting at the dog hour in front of the outer wall. Huey nodded affirmatively and was about to ask something, but seeing Tanchun's stern look, he immediately changed his mind and wished Soki a good appetite. Then, bowing his head, he said goodbye to Tanchun, who was already forcefully pushing Soki into the house. Huey asked Soki not to worry. He would come for her himself tomorrow. Tanchun again cast an unfriendly glance at him, and Huey quickly disappeared from sight. It was already dawn when Gyeonmyeon entered Tanchun's office, who had been sorting through papers all this time. Without looking up from the papers, Tanchun asked if he had thoroughly cleaned everything. Gyeonmyeon immediately reported that the maid named Simyan and her entire family had been eliminated. It turned out her parents were corrupt. The mother, a distant relative, took bribes from servants, promising to arrange jobs for them in the clan. The amount embezzled exceeded 200 taels of silver. This did not surprise Tanchun at all. As the head of the family, so were the servants. Nevertheless, he wanted this family to serve as an example. It was easier to pretend they were frightened and fled under the cover of night. Therefore, he ordered Gyeonmyeon to keep his mouth shut so that rumors would not reach Soki. But hiding everything forever was not the best solution. Gyeonmyeon was very surprised. Could the elder really intend to present this child to the world? That was exactly what Tanchun intended to do. He planned to personally take on this matter and completely reshape the balance of power. At the appointed time, Huey eagerly awaited Soki in front of the outer wall. He was already about to head to the wing, expecting to meet Soki there, when suddenly a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Soki was clearly worried and hurried with all her might. She was concerned that Huey had come too early and had been waiting for her too long. But Huey lied that he had just arrived and immediately noted that the dress Soki wore suited her very well. In it, she looked like a peach blossom. Of course, Soki was pleased to hear the compliments. It turned out she had not borrowed good clothes from her sister Sonchi in vain. Smiling, she suggested to Huey to move on, thinking to herself that she must not forget to buy Sonchi a gift on the way back. Finally arriving at the night market, Huey enthusiastically noted that there were quite a few lanterns hanging around, creating the impression that it was daytime on the street. Soki was also captivated by the view, but before she could even blink, Huey had already run ahead. That way one could easily get lost in the crowd. Without much thought, Soki ran up to Huey and firmly took his hand. Of course, he was very surprised, but he did not pull his hand away. With interest, examining the stalls and goods that the merchants were eagerly praising, Soki noticed that there were more attractions at the market than she had thought. Suddenly, sounds of indignation and shouts of dissatisfied men reached her ears. Turning around, Soki noticed a thin man who, sitting behind a small table, was urging the other men around not to quarrel and to check for themselves. It turned out the men were playing dice. A question immediately arose in Soki's mind. Could it be that even in such secluded places gambling games were held? Hui also noticed the noise and immediately headed there. Approaching, Hui asked what it was. Then the thin man, smiling, explained that it was a game called Battle of Numbers and invited the young gentleman to play. The essence of the game was to guess whether the sum of 2 dice was a big number or a small one. A sum from 1 to 6 was less, from 7 to 10 was more. Of course, Soki understood that the bait was clearly a plant. Who would even lead someone into such a thing? But to her surprise, Hui gladly agreed to the game. Soki tried to protest that it was a gambling game, but the thin man only smiled and replied that it was just ordinary entertainment and the player receives a small prize for winning. Sitting down at the table opposite the man, Hui immediately put 10 coins at stake, expecting less to come up. Soki, who was watching what was happening, was gloomier than a cloud. She understood that Hui would never win. And to confirm her thoughts, this time more came up. After a fairly short time, Hui's purse was completely empty. But Hui decided not to show that he was upset by the loss and cheerfully declared that a nobleman should not get attached to trifles. There was no point in scolding someone upset by a loss. So Soki decided that now was a good moment to leave this place. And when they had already turned to leave, the thin man sarcastically suggested to Soki to try her luck. Maybe she would be lucky and could win back the young gentleman's money. A sinister smile appeared on Soki's face. Could this swindler really think he had come across fools? Without hesitation, Soki laid the money on the table and accepted the offer of the slender man, intending to rob him blind. Time and again, Soki guessed the combination of numbers, which openly irritated the slender man. In principle, there was nothing surprising about this, since Soki had been watching him throughout the game. If the man touched his ear, more came up, and when he scratched his chin, less. In other words, the slender man simply deceived the trusting Hui, but he was extremely unlucky to stop Soki, who was already ready to turn a blind eye to it. The game was over, and rising from the table, Soki demanded her winnings. But the slender man was extremely displeased and was not going to part with the money so easily. He boldly declared that Soki had known everything from the very beginning, to which she replied that he shouldn't have cheated from the start. Suddenly it became quite quiet, and turning around, Soki finally realized that the spectators were in cahoots with the barker. She and Hui were immediately surrounded by about 7 or 8 people. The situation was extremely unpleasant. The forces were unequal, so Soki decided that in the worst case, she would use the poisonous needles in her bracelet. Nevertheless, Hui did not look frightened. Drawing his sword, he asked what all this meant. But this only brought a smile to the slender man's face. Could this kid really think himself a martial arts master? Swinging, the slender man was about to teach a lesson to the ill-mannered nobleman. Soki screamed in fear, but Hui easily dodged the blow and struck the opponent in the back of the head with the sword's hilt. The recruiter immediately collapsed to the ground unconscious. Then just as quickly, Hui dealt with the remaining opponents. Enchanted, Soki watched the battle. Although Hui was young, it was immediately clear that he was a master of martial arts. Not everyone is given the ability to so easily deal with opponents.
The swindler struggled to get up after the blow and declared that the boy would not get away with it. However, in response to the threat, Hui returned the sword to its sheath and advised the swindler to bring his complaints to the Namun clan. They would receive him at any time. At the mere mention of the Namun clan, the swindlers were blown away like the wind. They were so frightened that they completely forgot about the money, but Sohi did not. But when she began to gather it into a pouch, Hui reminded her in surprise that it was actually his money. Then Sohi also reminded him that the young master had lost all his bets, and she had won everything. Hui realized his mistake and, feeling sad, agreed with the girl. However, she smiled and said she was joking and was collecting money for Hui. After a small trouble with the swindlers, the couple continued their walk. But because of the brief scuffle, Hui developed an appetite, so he suggested eating something tasty. So he agreed, but then Hui suddenly became curious. How did she always guess the outcome of the game? So he understood that if she told the truth, the young master would attack the swindlers again. And therefore she wisely decided not to do it and lied that it was a simple female trick. The most important thing is that the money was returned, so Soki suggested celebrating it with delicious food. She asked Hui what he wanted, but the young gentleman answered the question with a question. What does Soki like? The girl was surprised by Huey's behavior, because just yesterday he acted like a wild child, and today suddenly he is interested in her preferences. In Soki's eyes, the young gentleman had grown up, for which she gently stroked his head. Only Huey himself was slightly embarrassed by the girl's behavior. Soki herself realized that she had allowed herself too much. Fortunately, there were performers nearby, so the girl quickly changed the subject, suggesting to watch a play. Huey was surprised by Soki's desire, because a minute ago they were going to have dinner, but he did not object. Fortunately, the play turned out to be much more interesting for Soki than she thought, and Huey really liked it. However, then she noticed Moen with his daughter among the spectators. Little G liked the main character of the play so much that she asked her father to take the actor with him. In response, Moen explained to his daughter that it was impossible because people are not animals. And even if he hired that actor, could Gui take responsibility for his life? The girl understood that she could not, and then Moen added that the actor has his own life, and only uneducated people try to force others to live as they want. At these words, Huey remembered how he himself tried to take Sohee without permission and felt very ashamed for it. Meanwhile, Moen told his daughter that since she understood his words, she should refuse the supreme elder of Tanchun. However, in response, Gui confidently stated that she could take responsibility for his life, which made Sohee laugh to tears. After the play, the couple finally had dinner and then continued walking around the market. At one of the stalls, Sohee even bought a gift for Huey in the form of a bracelet, which pleasantly surprised him. But soon the evening finally turned into night, so Sohee and Huey headed back to the Tan clan estate. However, on the way there, Huey suddenly shyly asked the girl, when will her coming-of-age ceremony be? Sohee could not say for sure. Then Huey said that his ceremony would take place in 2 years, after which he could get married. Sohee understood where the young master was heading and said that 15 years was too early and that Huey should be at least 18 to marry. At these words, the young man was confused and asked puzzledly if that was too late. But Soki explained with a sly smile that creating a family is not an easy task. You need to become an adult, be able to take responsibility, and you also need luck. But then Huey asked, wasn't that why she gave him a lucky bracelet? Soki assured that yes, although in fact she was choosing a gift for her little sister Sonshi, and Huey all the time kept hinting with his gaze that he also wanted a bracelet. However, then Huey suddenly changed the subject and asked with a worried look, what is Soki hiding from him? The girl became anxious, not understanding what the young gentleman meant. Soki assumed that Huey guessed exactly how she deceived those swindlers. However, then the young gentleman whispered that he heard yesterday how Soki called the clan elder grandpa. Moreover, why would the king himself take a simple maid as a pupil in poisons? So Huey figured out that Soki attends the heir's lessons and hides her identity to avoid revealing her status among the maids. Only Soki had no idea what the young master was talking about, so she tried to explain that it was not like that at all. But Huey stubbornly declared that he would keep her secret, which made Soki give up and decide that it was better for the young master to live in his delusion. However, then Huey became serious and said that he understands Soha's feelings. Carrying your family name is not an easy task. You need to learn a lot, you must always look mature, and you must excel in everything. But sometimes even Huey wanted to behave with his mom like his younger sister Yuna. But this is his duty as a young master. Huey must become a great man like his father to lead the Namun clan in the future. After these words, Soki realized that Huey's life was quite hard because 13 years old is the age when one most wants to play and be a child. And therefore she confidently declared that the young gentleman would definitely become a great man. So he knew this because she read the novella and Nam Hui succeeded in it. Meanwhile, Huey invited Soki to Hefei, to which the girl honestly replied that she would definitely come if she had the opportunity. However, Huey explained that this year the meeting would take place in the Namun clan, so Soki would come anyway, which made the girl wonder, how can a maid attend the meeting? Soon the couple reached the gates of the estate and it was time to say goodbye. Only Huey suddenly blushed and shyly wanted to suggest something to Soki. But then he suddenly changed his mind and hastily saying goodbye, immediately rushed away. Soki watched the young master with her eyes, amazed at how much he was embarrassed by a simple invitation to visit someone. The next day, Soki felt extremely uneasy. The matter was that in the morning, her sister Sunshai reported that since yesterday she could not find Simyan's group. Soki assumed that most likely they had hidden again and were shirking work. but Sanji still asked her to be careful. Then Soki wondered, could Simyan be avoiding her because of yesterday's commotion? However, then the girl was suddenly called by Huey. Soki was surprised by his appearance, since the young master should have already left for Hefei. But Huey explained that he could not leave until he gave Soki a farewell gift. With these words, the young master handed the girl a bundle and explained that inside was a letter. But Soki was to read it only in complete solitude. The girl reminded him that she could not read, but Huey assured her it was not a problem if Soki could read it in a year. He would be glad to talk more, but his father and servants had already started looking for him. Huey hurried back and asked in farewell that Soki definitely replied to his letter. When the young master left, Soki unfolded the bundle, and there, besides the letter, she found a hairpin. The girl remembered that she had seen this hairpin at the night market when she was choosing a gift for her sister Sonji. It turns out that Huey went out to buy this hairpin as a gift. Soki was touched by such a gesture, and as for the letter, she decided to read it in the evening when she returned to her room. But now Soki went to meet her grandfather, who was already planning to send Gyeongmyeon for her. Tanchun informed his granddaughter that he had convened the clan elders' council, and at this meeting he intended to introduce Soki for the first time. This decision greatly upset the girl, and Tanchun added that he planned to ask the elders' council to demand that the clan head register her in the family book. Since the Poison King chose Soki as his successor, she must be registered in the Tang clan. Soki confusedly reminded him that the elder had previously told her to live quietly, but he calmly stated that he had changed his mind. Not knowing who Soki really is, all sorts of insignificant people constantly pick on her. Of course, her sudden appearance will attract attention, and rumors about Soki will grow like a snowball. But Tanchun pointedly asked his granddaughter, does she understand what this means? In response, Soki suggested that grandfather deliberately wants to attract people's attention to her in order to protect her. Tanchun nodded satisfactorily at his granddaughter's words and explained that this is exactly why he will announce at the meeting that he protects Soki. However, to become a member of the Tan clan, the girl will have to prove her worth to the Council of Elders. Therefore, Tanchun ordered his granddaughter to prepare quickly and then called Lady Jing to help her. Soki was surprised by this decision, but grandfather stated that iron must be forged while hot and ordered Lady Jing to start immediately. She respectfully asked Soki to follow her, but the girl felt awkward that her former boss would be serving her. Soon Lady Jing returned Tanchun's granddaughter and reported that she had finished preparing the young lady. The Supreme Elder appreciated the work and said satisfactorily that now Soki looks very presentable. At these words, Soki looked embarrassedly at Lady Jing, who had taken on all the troubles from bathing to dressing the girl. But then Tanchun suddenly took a needle in one hand and touched his granddaughter's ear with the other. Soki anxiously asked her grandfather why he needed the needle, to which Tanchun explained that they needed to pierce her ears. Soki thought it would be very painful, but the elder did everything quickly and completely painlessly. There was only left to throw a shawl over the girl, and they could go to the meeting. So he hoped that this time they would go on the ground like all normal people. But Tanchun again took his granddaughter under his arm and hopped with her over the roofs. Soon they arrived at the palace where the Council of Elders was established. However, before entering, Tanchun warned his granddaughter that she must not allow the elders to intimidate her. Only after that did the Poison King open the doors and calmly enter the palace. There the clan elders were already waiting for them, whose eyes immediately fixed on Tanchun's granddaughter. Because of such attention, Sohi began to get nervous, but tried her best to look confident. Meanwhile, Tanchun was greeted by the head of the Council of Elders. He looked intently at the girl and said that since the Supreme Elder personally convened the meeting, there must be a very important reason for it. From the gaze of the head, Sohi felt pressure similar to what she felt at the meeting with her father, Muhyok. Meanwhile, Tanchun pointed to his granddaughter and told the council that this child has a body immune to poisons, but was found among the servants. The words of the Poison King alarmed all the elders, because a person immune to poisons was considered merely a legend. Then one of the elders enthusiastically suggested feeding Sohi one of the 8 strongest poisons. Realizing that they wanted to use her for experiments, the girl became even more anxious. But fortunately, the head of the council asked the elder to stop such talks. Then he turned to Tanchun and explained that despite good intentions, the council could not register an unknown servant in the clan. Then Tanchun announced to the entire hall that Sohi was the daughter of the clan leader, which again unsettled the elders. They immediately began whispering and discussing the girl before them and her late mother. But then Sohee heard words that horrified her. One of the elders revealed that MANHWA had locked the girl's mother in an annex and fed her poison. Perhaps that is why Sohee developed immunity to poisons, and if so, she needs to be studied. Sohee could not believe that the man calling himself her father tried to kill with poison the woman carrying his child. This means that Sohee's immunity to poisons is the result of her mother's suffering, which made her hate MANHWA even more. However, in the next moment, Tanchun silenced the noise and chatter of the elders. And when everyone fell silent, he declared that he had gathered the council to accept Sohee as his disciple. The blood of the clan leader flows in her, and she possesses an innate talent, so Tanchun believed that the girl was worthy of it. However, the council leader warned that if the council of elders intervened and demanded to include Sohee in the registry, it could be seen as interference in the matter of inheritance. But Tanchun was adamant and declared that even a stray dog would handle the work of the current clan leader better, so there could be no question of any misunderstanding. Sohee was struck by her grandfather's words, for could one say such things about the current clan leader? But judging by the reaction of the other elders, they all thought the same. The council leader agreed with Tanchun, but reminded him that MANHWA would still be against it. He was supported by the elder Tang, who was concerned about the reaction of the other members of the Tan family. For if the apprentice of the supreme elder was entered into the clan leader's registry, people would think that Tanchun personally appointed the heir. Therefore, Tang asked the supreme elder to promise not to interfere in the affairs of the next clan leader. However, in response, Tanchun declared that this was an unheard of impudence and emitted such an oppressive aura that all the elders were left breathless. But Tanchun did not stop there and explained to everyone present that Tangok's words sounded as if this old man was using a child just to toy with the clan. And so the Poison King asked Tangok, does he resemble a decrepit old man who cannot distinguish bad from good? The elder immediately cowardly assured that he did not even dare to think such a thing, but his words did not convince Tanchun. The King of Poisons loudly declared that he came here not to ask anyone's permission. And then he sternly ordered all the elders to convince the clan leader to include Sohee in the registry, or else he would throw them all out of the clan. At that very moment, the elders timidly ran out of the palace. And Sohee personally realized that her grandfather really had a bad temper. He called it a meeting, but in the end threw a tantrum with the words, "Do as I say." Meanwhile, Tanchun had already calmed down and suggested to his granddaughter to return home. However, when they left the palace, the grandfather anxiously asked Sohee if she was okay after everything that had happened. In response, the girl awkwardly admitted that at first it was a little difficult and unpleasant, but now everything was fine. 3 days passed after the visit to the Council of Elders, and as expected, the grandfather's threats proved incredibly effective. So much so that in the morning, the chief manager himself came to see him and Sohee. There was only one reason why he visited the King of Poisons, so Tanchun asked dispassionately, what did that scoundrel, MANHWA, say? In response, the chief manager assured that the clan leader would fulfill the supreme elder's wish. Also, the chief steward reported that tomorrow Lady Sohee would be able to move into the annex, but it was necessary to choose maids for her. MANHWA's third wife suggested sending her own maids, but Tanchun was against it. His granddaughter needed maids without masters. But then the elder had an idea and asked Sohee if she had friends and who shared a room with her. In response, the girl awkwardly admitted that she was only friends with Sonji's little sister and the laundress Guiona. But that was quite enough for Tanchun, and he ordered the chief steward to appoint these girls as Sohee's maids. Before leaving, the chief steward respectfully said goodbye to Sohee as to a young lady, which surprised the girl. Tanchun noticed this, and then Sohee had to explain that it was a little strange for her that her status suddenly changed. After all, before she could barely speak to the chief steward, and now he treated Sohee like a young lady. But Tanchun encouragingly placed his palm on his granddaughter's shoulder and with a smile assured her that this was only the beginning. Soon everything around Sohee would change, so it was time for her to get used to the changes. Meanwhile, the elder Tangok visited one of the clan leader's wives, Lady Cho, to tell her about what happened at the council. Hearing that Tanchun would personally teach the illegitimate girl, Lady Cho was outraged, because the Poison King had never agreed to teach the clan's children before. Because of this, the lady assumed that Tanchun had hidden motives, but Tangok assured that there were none, although no one knows what the future holds. Yonho had always been a walking problem. Sooner or later, he would bring trouble upon himself and lose the title of heir to the clan leader. But a child raised by the Supreme Elder himself was on a completely different level from the very beginning. Therefore, Sohee could become an obstacle in the path of Lady Cho's son. And since that was the case, she decided to deal with this girl before she became a problem. Tangak agreed with the lady because if the King of Poisons nominated Sohee as the successor, everything would become much more complicated. The elder suggested waiting for the right opportunity and was about to decline, but Lady Cho reminded him that her son, Huon, had earned the position of deputy commander. Tangak had to delicately explain that this was not within his authority, but since Yeonho was not fulfilling his duties, Huon would soon have such an opportunity. In response, Lady Cho discontentedly stated that Master Muhyog valued this worthless child too much and ordered the elder to return to his duties. Tangak obediently left the lady's chambers, but once outside, he muttered irritably that she had no right to request the deputy commander position. The elder knew well that Lady Cho was too reckless and did not know her place. But most importantly, she was incredibly greedy and always charged ahead, disregarding everyone. Therefore, Tangak planned to use the greed of the foolish lady to eliminate the clan head's seeds one by one. And then the elder's grandson would be able to lead the Tan clan and start his own line. And if Lady Cho acted independently, Tangak would not have to get his hands dirty, which was an even better result for him. After a few days, the Sohee house was completely ready and clean, on which occasion Tanchun decided to show it to his granddaughter. Sohee still could not believe that all this was done for her, but her grandfather assured her that since she was now officially registered, she should receive proper treatment. After inspecting the house and yard, Tanchun stated that the place looked good and called Yongmyeon. He immediately came at his lord's call, and then Tanchun ordered him to arrange for a pond to be dug in front of Sohee's pavilion and carp to be released there. The girl was surprised by this decision and asked her grandfather, why a pond here? But he explained to his granddaughter that it was necessary to restore her fishing activities, which Sohee was not very happy about. After touring the house, Tanchun introduced his granddaughter to her guard named Dokju, who would henceforth protect her. The King of Poisons explained that Dokju had proven himself well in the Black Cloud Squad, and his skill was beyond doubt, so Sohee should take him with her wherever she went. The girl asked about the Black Cloud Squad, and then Tanchun reminded her of Bugyeon, who is the commander of that squad. Black Cloud is the personal guard of the young master, Yonho, which Sohee found very surprising and asked, why then is Dokju her guard? In response, Tanchun proudly hinted that he has a couple of effective methods. However, from his words, Sohee assumed that her grandfather resorted again to violence and threats to bring Dokju to her. But in his defense, Tanchun explained that Dokju was simply fired, which left him wandering without work, so he took him in. Sohee was surprised by the dismissal of the guard and asked for the reason, to which her grandfather revealed that Yonho harassed Dokju, and when he tried to fight back, he was kicked out of the squad. Hearing about such lawlessness, Sohee regretted that her grandfather did not beat Yonho half to death. But Dokju calmed the girl and confessed that he already did. Nevertheless, Tanchun assigned Dokju to his granddaughter to keep her in check, and the elder told Sohee not to get into fights. Then Sohee asked, can she turn to Dokju for help if she suddenly quarrels with her older brother, Yonho? In response, Tanchun pinched his granddaughter's cheek and told her not to cause trouble if she did not want to be locked in her chambers. And before leaving, the Poison King warned Sohee that all her belongings would soon be moved by Gyunmyeon. But Sohee suddenly realized and, asking her grandfather to wait a little, quickly ran into the house. And the girl returned already with a gift for Tanchun. It was mung bean cookies that Sohee bought at the night market. No one had given Tanchun anything for a long time, so he accepted the gift from his granddaughter. But then he asked her not to spend money on the old man in the future, and if she bought sweets, to buy them for herself. But Sohee, with a warm smile, said that she bought the cookies because she was thinking of her grandfather and asked him to try them. However, after just one piece, Tangjun grimaced, which made Sohee remember that her grandfather hated sweets. Nevertheless, Tangjun quickly hid the gift in his pocket and assured her that the cookies were very tasty and that he would save the rest for later. Sohee understood that her grandfather said this out of politeness and vowed never to buy him sweets again. However, Tangjun then forced himself to eat all the cookies because it was a gift from his granddaughter. While waiting for his future servants, Sohee decided to drink tea. Only the idol was disturbed by noise coming from the yard. It was Gyeonmyeon starting to dig up the pond. But soon Sanji's little sister entered the house and immediately asked Soki why she had not returned to her room the previous evening. Before the girl could answer, Sanji immediately informed her about the illegitimate daughter of the clan leader found among the servants. Sohee tried to explain that it was her, but her little sister could no longer be stopped. Sanji asked why they were chosen as maids by the new mistress, and only after that did she finally notice Sohee's clothes. Then Dokju strictly ordered Sanji to show respect to her young mistress. At that moment, Gyona entered the house and, hearing the guard's words, dropped her things in fear. Sohee felt very awkward in front of her friends, so she hurried to calmly explain everything to them. However, these explanations lasted until late at night. Before dawn, Sohee was awakened by her little sister Sonshi, but she mumbled through drowsiness that she no longer needed to work. Then Sanshi threw off the blanket and sternly declared that the elder Tanchun himself had ordered her to be woken early in the morning. Sohee was slightly surprised by such treatment of the young mistress, but nevertheless immediately obeyed. Sanshi brought her water to wash her face, and after washing, Gyona brought the clothes that the mistress was supposed to wear. Sanshi explained that it was training attire and that the Supreme Elder himself had ordered Sohee to be sent to his pavilion as soon as she woke up. Sohee was surprised that she already had to go somewhere without even having breakfast, but her sister hurried her and said that Dokju was already waiting for her outside. By the time the guard brought Sohee to Tanchun, it was already dawn. The elder greeted his granddaughter and showed her the pond that Gyeonmyeon had made. However, Tanchun did not stay there long and led Sohee to the shrine where the ancestral spirit tablets are kept. Before entering the shrine, the elder ordered Dokju to wait outside, which slightly surprised Sohee. Entering inside, Tanchun introduced his granddaughter to the portrait of the clan founder Tang and asked her to perform 3 deep bows. Sohee immediately bowed very low to the founder, after which Tanchun said that he had been his mentor. Sohee was amazed by the fact that her grandfather was taught by the clan founder himself. However, Tanchun smiled and told that the founder was a bit crazy, obsessed with poisons. Once he beat Tanchun when he refused to take poison, and even locked him in a cauldron with poison overnight. From these words, Sohee decided that the founder was not just crazy, but completely insane. Nevertheless, she bowed as her grandfather instructed, and he explained that this bow was a ritual of accepting Sohee as a disciple of the clan. And when the girl finished, Tanchun asked her to bow to him 3 times as well. Thus, Sohee would become the apprentice of the Poison King. However, before performing the bow, Sohee still dared to ask, "Does Tanchun have any other apprentices besides her?" In response, the grandfather admitted that all his other apprentices had long been dead, so Sohee was now the only apprentice of the Poison King. And Tanchun also warned his granddaughter that she could not take back her words, so she had to finish the bows. Sohee realized she had gone too far and could no longer retreat, so she respectfully bowed to her future mentor. After that, Tanchun asked his granddaughter with a satisfied smile, "Does she remember his words?" In response, Sohee repeated the grandfather's words, to stand out among others, because the stronger the interest in her, the more secure her position. Then Tanchun solemnly declared that from now on Sohee was the only apprentice of the Poison King. However, the elder added that his skill as a martial arts master spoke for itself, and if Sohee became his apprentice, she must have the corresponding skills. In other words, Tanchun did not want to see his granddaughter beaten on the street like a helpless child. Therefore, he took Sohee under his arm and headed off to train with her. Exactly 1 week had passed since Sohee became Tanchun's apprentice. But all this week, Tanchun made his granddaughter run laps around the Tang clan residence. At the same time, the girl had to climb the mountains near Sando every day. But the most amazing thing was that after exhausting runs, grandfather massaged the meridians of Sohee on her arms and legs. And the next morning, she woke up energetic and without any muscle pain. Only thanks to this technique was Sohee able to run in the mountains for a whole week. And on the 8th day, Tanchun declared that Sohee's legs had finally become stronger, which she could not be happier about. The girl hoped that the running was now over, but Tanchun explained that since she had gotten used to running, it was time to move on to climbing rocks. And before Sohee could realize what she had heard, grandfather immediately picked her up in his arms and jumped down from the rock into the valley. There, he put his granddaughter on the ground and warned that he would wait for her at the top of the rock so she could start climbing now. But just the sight of that very rock made Sohee feel sick. Fortunately, Dokju dared to point out to the elder that the rock was too steep for the young lady to climb. But Tanchun was adamant and said that if Sohee suddenly fell, Dokju would simply catch her. Only Sohee was still against this idea. Moreover, how could she even climb the rock with her flimsy arms? However, to the girl's surprise, there was already no trace of Tanchun. Dokyo hinted that the elder was already at the top and looking at the summit of the rock, Sohee really saw her grandfather there. He hurried his granddaughter, and then Sohee realized that running was much better. Despite the fact that she had been climbing the rock all morning, Sohee barely managed to overcome a tenth of the way. And that only happened because Dokju was climbing with her. Having finished training for today, the tired Sohee barely made it to her pavilion. However, there she was awaited by a sudden guest in the person of Brother Yoon. He, with a light smile, announced that by order of the Supreme Elder, from now on, after training, Sohee would study with him. Sohee did not dare to contradict the will of her brother or grandfather, but right now she would have preferred to turn into a ficus. Meanwhile, Yoon sat opposite and declared that today they would read the I Ching. Sohee honestly tried to listen carefully to her brother, but it felt as if she had ended up in a history lesson after physical education. In the end, after several hours, she was finally overcome by sleep. Having finished reading, Yoon slammed the book shut, which immediately woke Sohee. However, her brother was not offended that she was sleeping, and with a smile suggested to finish for today, to which Sohee gladly agreed. However, Yoon could not allow her to just idle and decided to tell his sister about the 10 revered martial arts of the world. Sohee had heard of them for the first time, and therefore she was filled with genuine interest. Then Yoon explained that these are called the 10 unmatched masters, known as the 10 great masters of the Celestial Empire. And Grandfather Tanchun is one of these masters, which amazed Sohee. Moreover, it turned out that she was acquainted with another master, the Elder Penpak, who had recently visited the Tan clan. He holds the title of the Lord of the Tiger Saber because he leaves behind torn bodies of enemies as if they had been in the claws of a tiger. Among the 10 masters, there is also a healer whose martial skills are like a noble art. Her name is Imsol, and she bears the title of the Divine Healer with Phantom Hands. As can be understood from the nickname, she is a famous healer in the Central Plains, and Yoon very much wanted to meet her, but their paths never crossed. Sohee understood why her brother so strongly longed to meet this master, and because of this she felt sorry for him. But Yoon quickly changed the subject and asked his sister, does she know which of the 9 great sects are Taoist? Sohee answered that it was Wudong and Manhwa, but her brother explained that Kunlun, Kongtong, and Qingcheng are also Taoist sects, although their fame is not as great. Of course, if you need to choose the best Taoist sect, it would undoubtedly be Wudong, since one of the 10 masters also comes from there. This master holds the title Immortal Sword, and Sohee was familiar with him. All because in the novel, the Immortal Sword was a rival of Namgun Hui. But now he is young, like Hui, so Sohee became curious. What is he doing now? Meanwhile, Yoon continued the story, and soon Sohee was forced to admit that her brother turned out to be a capable teacher. He explained to her the history of Jung-hoo as if reading a fairy tale, igniting her curiosity. However, then Yoon suddenly stopped the story at the most interesting part, which greatly surprised Sohee. But in the evening, when she herself took the book in her hands, Sohee realized that in this natural way, her brother had awakened in her the desire to learn. The next day, after training, Sohee was preparing to continue lessons with Yoon. She had not yet finished studying the book I Ching, so she was consumed by terrible curiosity. What happened next? But to the girl's surprise, instead of her brother, Tanchun came to her. In his hands, he carried a tray with a bowl of broth made from carp, which Sohee was supposed to drink. The girl was frightened by the dark color of the broth, but Dokju explained to her that it was broth from a fire carp, a rare spiritual creature that the elder had obtained at great effort. After the guard's words, Sohee stopped being afraid. Now she was touched by the fact that her grandfather had caught a spiritual beast for her. However, as soon as she drained the bowl, it felt as if something boiled in her stomach. Tanchun immediately told his granddaughter to sit on the floor so that he could direct her internal energy. Sohee did as she was told, and then Tanchun asked her to remain silent while he directed the spiritual energy of the fire carp through her body. Sohee felt pain, as if living fire was burning her veins from the inside. However, the girl could endure this pain thanks to her grandfather's qi, which he was infusing into her body. When Tanchun finally finished, Soki felt exhausted. But then the grandfather rose from the floor and asked her to remember this sensation in order to later learn to circulate her energy independently in a similar way. Only Soki admitted that she did not understand a single bit, which puzzled Tanchun. He had to tell his granddaughter about meridians, points in the human body that form a vessel through which qi circulates, and one full circulation of qi through the vessel is called a small heavenly cycle. However, even after this lecture, Soki understood little, but assured her grandfather otherwise. She thought that the use of such tonics ended that very day, but it continued for about a month. Since Soki's level was too low, she could not consume spiritual beasts in their raw form. Therefore, Tanchun had to prepare them, which reduced their power. And after each intake of such a tonic, he helped his granddaughter circulate energy every time. As a result, Soki's endurance greatly increased, and she was even able to feel a weak qi in her body. After another circulation of qi, Tanchun ordered his granddaughter to climb the rock again. And when he went outside, Dokju told Soki that despite his strictness, the elder valued her very much. An absolute master who helps direct qi and absorbs spiritual energy is a luxury unavailable to others. Moreover, it is a very difficult task because even the slightest mistake can cause qi deviation in both. That is why teacher and student rarely engage in this. Dokju's words shocked Soki because in novels, teachers constantly did this for the main characters, so she took it for granted. But as it turned out, Tanchun took such a risk for her. Therefore, today Soki was confident that she could climb the rock. Only a month ago, she could not understand how to climb to the top. And today, Sohi had only a couple more bursts left to reach Tanchun. But suddenly, a sudden gust of wind struck the rock. Sohi was completely unprepared for it and therefore fell down. But worst of all was that Dokju did not manage to catch his lady. Sohi was already ready to say goodbye to this life, but the next moment she was caught by Tanchun. He gently landed and put his granddaughter on the ground, but she continued to tremble with fear. The thought that she had almost died terrified Sohi. However, Tanchun was clearly displeased with his granddaughter's behavior and coldly told her that a martial arts master never closes their eyes out of fear. And then he even ordered Sohi to climb the rock again, as if nothing had happened a moment ago. At her grandfather's words, Sohi forgot about fear because it was replaced by anger and resentment. She could endure all the scratches and abrasions because developing the body is the first step to learning martial arts. Soki knew that it was necessary, as well as that Tanchun did a lot for her. But what the girl just experienced was completely different, and she was not going to accept it. Therefore, she loudly called out to her grandfather and declared that the training was too hard. In response, Tanchun condescendingly explained that the training was supposed to be hard and that Soki was obliged to complete it. But she was not going to back down and asked her grandfather, "Wasn't he too cruel?" At these words, Tanchun flinched, and Soki said in a voice trembling with excitement that she had just barely escaped death. And her heart still could not calm down and her head was spinning. Well then, Soki even burst into tears like a child. Tanchun immediately rushed to comfort his granddaughter and apologized for being too harsh with her. Through tears, Soki explained that she was not upset, just very scared. Then the Tanchun wiped her face with a handkerchief and praised his granddaughter, assuring her that she had held up well. And when Soki calmed down, her grandfather announced that it was time to teach her the method of mental improvement. In other words, for Soki, the time had come to form her Dantian, which greatly inspired the girl. But then Tanchun, with a guilty look, admitted that he had been too impatient, since rice also needs time to steam before it can be eaten. Therefore, he apologized to his granddaughter for making her eat raw rice. Soki was glad that her grandfather also considered the training too difficult. However, then he stated that during war, even raw rice is a blessing, which Soki could not argue with. After that, Tanchun led her deep into the bamboo grove, where the pavilion of the heart was located. Upon reaching it, Tanchun ordered Dokju to leave the pavilion's boundaries. And then he asked Soki to sit on the ground and suddenly asked his granddaughter, "What is poison?" Soki was slightly puzzled by the question, but then simply answered that poison is poison. Tanchun was satisfied with this answer and added that regardless of whether poison is mixed with water or with wine, poison always remains poison. Just one drop is enough to contaminate a well, but to remove this drop, 10 wells will be needed. The penetrating ability of poison is incredibly strong because it can penetrate the energy of any living being. If you release freshwater fish into the sea or sea fish into fresh water, that fish will die. The same thing will happen if a person with pure qi absorbs demonic energy, and vice versa. If someone who studied demonic arts absorbs qi capable of destroying evil, their dantian will be destroyed. After these words, Soki realized that the nature of qi is like poison. Tanchun praised his granddaughter for her cleverness and explained that this is exactly why one should not carelessly exchange internal energy with members of other clans. But what will happen if a person allows poison to penetrate the qi they absorb? This question puzzled Soki, but after thinking, she suggested that if qi of a different nature is turned into poison and given the same properties, then it can be accepted into one's dantian. Tanchun praised his granddaughter again and asked what needs to be done for this, to which Soki replied that she needs to turn her dantian into a vessel of poison so that any qi in it turns into poison. Tanchun accepted his granddaughter's answer and explained that this is precisely the method of mental refinement. It is a secret technique that cannot be used without gaining immunity to poisons, like Soki. But before she can form her dantian, the girl must memorize the mnemonic spell of the King of Poisons. However, Tanchun assembled it very roughly, and much time has passed, so he no longer remembers this spell. Sohi was amazed by her grandfather's words. After all, how could one forget their own spell? But Tanchun asked her not to worry about it and just close her eyes. Sohi was very happy to finally start learning the method of improvement, but she did not understand what it was at all and how long she would have to do it. Sohi diligently moved her qi along the path cleared by Tanchun, but she only felt a tickling in her lower abdomen and no signs of forming the dantian. Having not achieved results, Sohi decided to ask Tanchun how to properly move the qi. Opening her eyes, Sohi was surprised why it had become dark around her. Then Tanchun explained that quite a lot of time had passed. And then he asked if Sohi had managed to form her dantian. But Sohi did not know how to answer this question, as she only felt a tickling in her lower abdomen. Tanchun advised Sohi not to expect a perfect result the first time, and then decided to look at his student's progress himself. Tanchun was impressed. Sohi's lower dantian had taken root and the size was quite good. And the tickling sensation in the abdomen was from the true energy of Tanchun remaining in Sohi's vessels. The effect was temporary, so there was no reason to worry. Sohi exhaled with relief. Now she finally felt her dantian and immediately noticed that the color of her internal energy was similar to Tanchun's energy. Smiling, Tanchun explained that it was all because of the method of improvement and that over time Sohi's eye color would change as soon as internal energy accumulated. Deciding that training was over for today, Tanchun helped Sohi to her feet. He was very worried whether his student felt dizzy. Sohi was already ready to shake her head negatively when she suddenly felt dizziness and a cramp seized her lower abdomen. The more often Sohi perfects her qi, the stronger her body will become and the internal energy will accumulate faster. Gently massaging Sohi's head, Tanchun advised training only when he or Dokju were on guard, because even the slightest blow could harm the concentration of qi. Also, Tanchun forbade Sohi from touching the internal energy as it could exhaust her life force. Sohi only nodded in response, and she no longer heard Tanchun's further speech as she fell into a deep sleep. Noticing this, Tanchun only smirked. The martial arts master fell asleep completely defenseless, exposing his most vital points. On a normal day, Tanchun would have scolded Sohi for such recklessness, but now he simply did not have the heart to do so. It seemed only yesterday Sohi was locked in her shell and afraid to hurt him, and already today she was crying and throwing a tantrum that she could not cope with the task. Of course, Tanchun was glad that Sohi finally managed to trust him and began to behave according to her age. Then Dokju appeared and offered to carry Sohi, but Tanchun immediately refused, saying he would take care of the student himself. Following back to the house, Tanchun asked Dokju to look after Soki, since she has a kind heart and cannot show ruthlessness. Dokju only nodded in response and continued to follow his master. Waking up in the morning, Soki was surprised to find herself in her room, but remembered nothing about how she returned home. Hearing that Soki had woken up, Sunji immediately entered the room, brought water, and told her that yesterday Tanchun had brought her while she was sleeping. Soki almost choked on the water from such news, while Sanji continued to scold her friend for carelessness. Handing Soki a towel, Sanji began to hurry the young lady as she needed to attend the morning training. Not quite understanding what was going on, Soki began her morning toilette. She could not believe that she had fallen asleep during the massage last night. Of course, lately Tanchun had been pampering Soki. Nevertheless, it was extremely impolite on her part. But Soki decided to think positively. Tanchun would not kill his own granddaughter after spending so many valuable elixirs. Saying goodbye to the maids, Soki followed Dokjung, who was patiently waiting for the young mistress to appear. Watching them leave, Sunji hoped that Soki would soon understand how much Tanchun cared for her. Last night, the Poison King simply brought the sleeping Soki, which greatly frightened Sunji. Although it was summer outside and the chance of freezing was extremely low, Tanchun ordered the servants to warm the bed with a hot water bottle. And after he personally made sure the bed was warm, Tanchun laid the young lady down and left. A loud scream, a splash, and Soki found herself in the water. Standing up, she looked reproachfully at Tanchun. But Tanchun was adamant. To master the art of lightness, Soki needed to step more softly, not move broadly. Stepping lightly on the water, Tanchun demonstrated how it should be done. Soki looked at Tanchun pleadingly. She had just begun to learn this. Couldn't the difficulty be lowered a bit? Sighing heavily, Soki collapsed weakly onto the training arena floor. Soki thought mental methods of improvement would suffice, but there was too much to learn: footwork, lightness skills, and even mastery of hidden weapons. Looking sternly at his pupil, Tanchun asked what exactly Soki was studying while lying on the arena. Immediately, Soki tried to wriggle out by claiming it was Shavasana, a yoga pose that helps feel the flow of inner energy. But such banal tricks did not work on Tanchun, so he asked Soki to stop fooling around and get up. Suddenly, Gyeonmyeon appeared behind and reported the arrival of a visitor. Tanchun just waved it off and ordered to send the guest back, as he was not willing to receive anyone during training. But Gyeonmyeon reported that the guest was the head of the military alliance Wijigok, and he urgently needed to discuss something with Tanchun. Tanchun was extremely displeased. Since Wijigok had come personally, the matter was important. Nevertheless, he ordered that the leader be escorted to the pavilion. As soon as Gyeonmyeon disappeared from sight, Tanchun declared that training was over for today, and so he had 15 minutes to wash up and change clothes. So he was horrified. The road from the training ground to the house alone would take 15 minutes, so how could she prepare in such a short time? But Tanchun saw no problem in this, since Sohee had learned the skills of lightness, so she should hurry. In the pavilion, settling at a comfortable table, Tanchun immediately asked what exactly had brought the alliance leader to Sichuan, since the journey was quite difficult. To which Wijigok replied that he did not need a reason to visit the great elder of Zhenghu, as it was his duty as the junior in status. Sneaking a glance, Sohee noticed that Wijigok looked much older than Tanchun. Finally, Wijigok's gaze fell on Sohee, and he guessed that she was the very disciple that Tanchun had recently accepted. Tanchun had no idea that the alliance leader was so interested in the affairs of Sichuan. Smiling slyly, Wijigok replied that everyone already knew about it, and wasn't it Tanchun himself who deliberately ordered rumors to be spread about it. Because of all these political talks, Soki felt like a third wheel, but she could not object in any way. Tanchun was tired of beating around the bush, so he decided to get down to business. It seemed that Wijigok had some request for the King of Poisons. In response, Viji nodded affirmatively. The request concerned the alliance, or rather he wanted Tanchun to accompany him to a certain place. Tanchun immediately refused, then Wijigok, pulling a jade medallion from his bosom, which was given to him by the healer with ghostly hands. Tanchun was beside himself with rage. How could Sol-yak dare to pull off such a thing? Of course, Soki did not understand what had so enraged Tanchun, since it was only a single-use item. Taking the medallion in his hands, Tanchun said he would definitely demand payment from Sol-yak. Wijigok only nodded affirmatively, as the healer had warned him about the consequences. Hiding the jade medallion, Tanchun asked Soki to step outside for a minute. He needed to discuss matters with the guest alone. As soon as the door closed, Wijigok suggested that Tanchun valued Soki very much, and judging by the reaction, she was clearly not an ordinary apprentice. The King of Poisons, who had secluded himself in the Tang pagoda and had not gone out anywhere, recently began to go out and send messages. And it seemed all this was for a girl named Soki. It seemed to be an unusual matter, since the Im family had handed the jade medallion to Wijigok, so Tanchun asked directly what was going on. Then Wijigok explained that recently the number of missing members of the alliance during missions had increased. At first, the alliance assumed it was ordinary desertion, but when the Pavilion of Secret Investigations took up the case, it turned out not to be so. All the missing were found disabled, having forgotten what had happened. Considering the circumstances, people were used as test subjects and then discarded. And then Tanchun pondered, it turns out this case was clearly worth Vijigok appearing in person. The Alliance requested help in creating an antidote. All the rescued showed symptoms similar to opium poisoning. And although the divine healer prescribed various antidotes, none of them worked. Vijigok pulled from his sleeve a vial containing what was extracted from the blood of one of the poison squad members. Carefully pouring the contents of the vessel into a cup, Tanchun immediately felt that the liquid contained Manhwa and aconite. Only ingredients with stimulating effects were used. It turns out the goal was for the person not to feel pain. So Tanchun decided to inquire what exactly the M family wanted. Then Vijigok reported that the M family asked to establish the formula of the mineral poisons used. They also ordered to inform Tanchun that traces of the use of bloody Yingu were found. Now Tanchun understood why the M family got involved in the affairs of the Combat Alliance. It turns out the demonic cult made its move. Meanwhile, Soki awaited the end of the meeting sitting by the pond. Her mind was in complete chaos. The current head of the Combat Alliance, Vijigok, was never mentioned in the novel. The head of the Combat Alliance in the novel at the time when Namun wandered the world was the abbot of Shaolin. Therefore, Soki assumed that in the future, Vijigok could become like Imsolyak. But she decided to leave this question aside, as she had enough worries now. In particular, Soki was very interested in the jade medallion that had enraged Tanchun. After all, it was not mentioned in the novel either. The suddenly appeared Gyeonmyeon advised Soki to return to her pavilion, as the conversation could drag on for a long time. A little frightened, Soki still found the strength to greet the 17th elder. Gyeonmyeon was very surprised to hear the title simply given to him by the Supreme Elder, as he did not consider himself such. Gyeonmyeon assumed that no one considered him an elder, as he was just the son of a gatekeeper who was lucky enough to receive the surname Tang. In response, Soki only smirked. According to Gyeonmyeon's logic, she was just the daughter of a courtesan who was lucky enough to survive. Realizing the words spoken, Gyeonmyeon sighed heavily and offered his deepest apologies, asking henceforth to be addressed as Sir, and then again advised Soki to return to the pavilion, promising to inform her when the Supreme Elder was free. Soki wanted to ask something else, but before she could even blink, Gyeonmyeon disappeared. The nearby Dokju asked if Soki was ready to return to the pavilion, to which she nodded affirmatively. On the way home, Soki decided to ask if Dokju knew anything about the Combat Alliance. Soki was simply curious, as she knew little about the Combat Alliance, so she asked Dokju to tell her everything he had heard. Then Dokju revealed that external forces could not operate in Sichuan without the support of the Tang clan. But since the Combat Alliance and the Tang clan were on friendly terms, they were allowed to open a branch in Sichuan. Moreover, once every 3 months, Alliance members would visit the Tang clan, so this could be considered an exchange of information. Such an exchange of information resembled more a request for cooperation. Now Soki began to understand that if the head of the Combat Alliance had arrived personally, although members of the combat squad were already in Sichuan, it meant he had an extremely unusual matter. Noticing Soki's worried face, Dokju advised keeping today's events a secret, as sometimes it is better to remain unaware. Of course, Soki understood exactly what Dokju meant, so she asked him not to worry. Nevertheless, Soki hoped that the matter with which Vijigok had come was not very serious, as she was very concerned about Tanchun. 2 days later, early in the morning, Gyeonmyeon entered the pavilion to Sohee and delivered a message from Tanchun to continue training and not to relax. Gyeonmyeon also reported that the journey would take 7 days and 7 nights. This fact greatly worried Sohee, as she was very concerned about Tanchun's safety, but Gyeonmyeon assured her that there was no reason to worry. Then Sohee asked, why didn't Gyeonmyeon go on the journey with Tanchun? Gyeonmyeon ignored this question and advised her to finish the morning training on her own, promising to come by in the afternoon and check. Sohee was extremely concerned about such behavior. Gyeonmyeon appeared at the crack of dawn only to remind her to train harder. Sohee's thoughts were interrupted by Sokji reminding the young lady about the dinner at the clan leader's pavilion. And then Sohee remembered that Yoon had spoken about the meeting of the Tan clan members, who gather on the first day of each month to have dinner together. This time Sohee was also invited, so Yoon strongly urged her not to forget about such an important event. Sohee hesitated a little and told Sokji that she had nothing to wear to the formal dinner. Tanjun had sewn only 10 sets of training clothes for Sohee, and all the few casual clothes had been hastily given to her by Lady Jing. The rest were either pajamas or clothes Sohee wore when she was a servant, so she decided to simply wear training clothes to the dinner. But Seokji immediately protested, since this was Sohee's first official meeting with the other relatives. There were already many rumors that Sohee had survived, so if she appeared in a battered state, the family would look down on her. Suddenly, protests were heard from behind the door from Dokju, which attracted the attention of Sohee and Seokji. Entering the room, Dokju offered his sincere apologies and reported that a young lady had come to visit Sohee. Sohee was already about to ask whom Dokju was talking about, but the words stuck in her throat and her eyes widened. Into the room entered the mad bitch of the Tang clan, Tang Juhui, Sohee's half-sister. The senior lady of the Tang clan, Juhui, whose hobby was making deadly poisons, was notoriously known among the servants for her hot temper. Some of the servants assumed that Juhui had lost her mind due to excessive use of poisons. Others believed that she was simply born that sensitive. At one moment it seemed that Juhui was in a good mood, but the next second she seemed to snap. Because of this, Ju was nicknamed the Mad Bitch of the Tang clan. Of course, these were just rumors, and Sohee did not know what Ju's true character was. Moreover, she had only briefly seen Hui during the meetings of the 5 great clans. Nevertheless, Sohee was very nervous, as she did not understand what Ju Hui had forgotten in her pavilion so early in the morning. Taking Sohee by the chin, Ju asked with interest whether the young lady really had a body resistant to poisons. Not waiting for an answer, Ju added that she had a wonderful poison that would be perfect for Sohee, but unfortunately she would not be able to treat Sohee with it. In horror, Sohee recoiled, wondering if Ju had lost her mind because a sane person would not call a poison wonderful. Having regained her composure a little, Sohee noticed with surprise that a small white snake was resting on Ju's shoulder. Startled a little, Sohee asked to remove the reptile. Ju, not fully understanding the reason for the request, nevertheless put Beck into her sleeve. Then Ju asked if Sohee had suitable clothing, since she had been a servant before, so Hui doubted that she had a decent dress. Sohee was indignant, wondering if Ju Hui had come to the pavilion only to mock her, but she did not show it. Ju Hai decided to give Sohee clothes she had never worn before and asked the servant to bring the dresses. A girl named Soso entered the room holding a wooden casket and reported that all 12 outfits had never been worn by Lady Ju before. Sohee asked why Lady Ju was doing this, since they had only met today. To which Ju asked to drop the formalities and call her sister. She was doing this because she liked Sohee. Ignoring the remarks, Ju Hui immediately pulled out a white dress, which she believed should suit Sohee. After some time, Ju, carefully beautifying Sohee's nails, suggested smearing the tips of the fake nails with deadly poison. Hearing about such a method, Sohee was very surprised, wondering if Ju was using a secret weapon. Ju Hai was bored with throwing poisoned weapons from afar, so she preferred to fight in close combat. Also, Ju wanted to spar with Sohee after she studied martial arts from Tongzhong. But Sohee did not really like fistfights, yet she still decided to ask Ju if she really considered sparring fun. Ju Hai nodded affirmatively. She liked feeling the blood rush and boil inside. Besides, it was a legitimate way to beat Tang Yan Ho. Seeing the confusion on Sohee's face, Ju explained that Tang Yan Ho was the elder brother of the clan, who was lucky to become the heir only because he was born first. Finally finishing applying the design on the nails, Ju smiled contentedly and said she would gladly apply poison to the nail tips if Sohee wanted. Carefully examining her hands, Sohee had the impression that Ju had already managed to apply poison without her knowledge. Suddenly, Yoon entered the room and happily noted that Ju had already gotten close to Sohee. Joyfully exclaiming, Ju rushed into her brother's arms, almost knocking him down. Smiling contentedly, Ju said she had brought clothes for Sohee and praised her beauty. Now Sohee began to understand why Ju Hui was helping her. She had simply judged people by their appearance. Skillfully catching the stunned Sohee by the arms, Yong and Ju Hui joyfully headed to the main pavilion. Sipping tea at the common table, Sohee realized why Yong and Ju held her so tightly while dragging her to the pavilion. There was complete chaos at the table. Tang Yan Ho had already gotten drunk early in the morning. Ju Hai was busy obtaining poison right at the dining table. And the 5th brother of the family, Tang Juyap, for some unknown reason had been playing the flute since early morning. The doors opened and Muhyuk entered the hall. Glancing at the table, he immediately asked why Hwayop, Cho Hee, and Seho were absent. Finally tearing himself away from the flute, Ju Yup replied that Hua Yup had gone to Mount Qingcheng to meet friends, and Cho He Hui was most likely in the forge. And Ju Hui, without pausing, added that Seiho was planning to go somewhere with the elder Tongak. Nodding affirmatively, Muhyuk sat down at the table and asked Ju Hui to remove the snake. Soki was disappointed because she believed the gathering was necessary to improve family ties during the meal. But she did not hear a single word, although 6 people were sitting at the table. Suddenly the door opened and Cho Hui entered the room without saying a word. And then Muhyuk was outraged because Cho Hee was again missing in the forge and was late because of it. Muhyuk did not like that the daughter of the head of the great house was wandering the night markets and thus disgracing the family name. Then Cho sharply suggested simply to kick her out, since Muhyuk was excellent at pretending the children did not exist. To somehow lighten the mood, Ju Yep jumped up from the chair and asked what Choi had forged today. But Choi was not in the mood for small talk. Nevertheless, she dryly answered her brother that she had forged a sword and was completely satisfied with the result. To Ju Yep's offer to forge a sword for him as well, Choi responded with a refusal and asked her brother to leave. In the most affected way, Ju Yep showed that he was offended by his sister and asked her to be kinder to him. Because of this awkward situation, Soha's stomach started to hurt, and she felt a little nauseous. Noticing Soha's distorted facial expression, Ju Yep immediately assumed she had indigestion. And pulling a small vial from his sleeve, Ju Yep offered a digestive remedy that he himself often drank. Without expecting any trick, Soha carelessly drank the offered remedy, which greatly surprised Ju Yep. After all, he assumed that Soki would immediately collapse, so, doubting his calculations, Ju Yep himself drank from the vessel. Noticing the surprise on Soki's face, Ju Yop tried to explain that the vessel contained the strongest poison. But before Ju Yop could finish speaking, foam came out of his mouth and he collapsed onto the stone floor. Soki was horrified. It turned out Ju Yop expected her to be poisoned, and when the poison did not work, he decided to try it himself. But Soki was worried about something else entirely. Why didn't the other participants at the feast stop her? Noticing the reproachful look, Yoon tried to explain that Ju Yop's action seemed cute to him, especially since he knew Soki would not die from the poison. Mukyuk sighed heavily. He had already warned Ju several times not to bring poisons to the dining table. Cho demanded that this misunderstanding be immediately removed from the room, and servants with stretchers quickly arrived and took Ju Yop away. Watching this scene, Soki involuntarily smiled. After all, the Tang family was truly a den of madmen. Sincerely worried about Ju Yop, Soki followed him to the infirmary. She could not understand how one could be poisoned by a poison they themselves had prepared. The irritated doctor coming out of the ward asked Soki to leave, since in this situation she could not help Ju Yop in any way. According to the doctor's assessment, Ju Yop would have to lie unconscious for the next 4 hours, so Soki could quite well attend to her own affairs. The doctor's words somewhat calmed Soki, and she was about to leave, but the door suddenly opened and Tan Soho rushed into the infirmary. The doctor immediately protested, since he had already repeated several times that one must behave quietly in the infirmary. But Seho ignored the remark and started taking off his shoes. Seho was in a great hurry because he needed to have time to draw while Ju Yop was unconscious. When Seho took out a brush and poured ink into a flat container, the doctor guessed that he wanted to paint Ju Yop's face. Last time Ju Yop drew a mustache on Seho, so he decided to return the favor and skillfully began wielding the brush. Soki, deciding not to get involved in more trouble, was about to leave, but Seho suddenly called out to her. Carefully examining her, Seho asked Soki if she was by any chance the youngest one brought by Tanchun. In response, Soki only nodded affirmatively. Then Seho handed her the brush and suggested they draw together. Soki immediately tried to protest, saying that it was not right since Ju Yop was sick. But Seho was absolutely unconcerned. Since Ju Yop was the first to act badly when he tried to poison Soki, she would not be able to object. And if something went wrong, they could always say they were not involved. Of course, Soki doubted that such an excuse would work. Then Seho demanded that Soki not get arrogant just because she was accepted into the family. And then he asked to be called older brother, since his birthday was earlier than Soki's. Completely confused, Soki suggested that Soki decide exactly how to call him, older or younger brother. And while Soki was diligently thinking, Soki once again realized that he was much more naive than he seemed at first glance. Finally deciding, Soki joyfully exclaimed and declared that from now on he was the older brother, and Soki was his younger sister. Then smiling quite a bit, Soki asked him if the older brother had a gift for her. Surprise appeared on Soki's face. Then Soki explained that the older brother is supposed to take care of the younger ones. As an example, she mentioned Zhu, who gave Soki new dresses. Noticing the worried face of the older brother, Soki wondered if Soki had taken her joke seriously. Unlike the other members of the Tang family, Soki seemed quite gentle to Soki. Nervously rustling in one of his sleeves, Soki pulled out his favorite scorpion and offered it as a gift for Soki. Soki cherished the scorpion very much, as he had personally raised it for 4 years. But such a gift did not impress Soki much, so she tactfully refused, saying that the scorpion would be better off with Soki. Quickly rushing out onto the street, Soki caught her breath. The morning had been crazy. First, relatives fed her poison under the pretext of medicine, and now they were trying to give her a scorpion as a gift. Soa had the impression that this was not a family, but some kind of curse. Tanchun was still away, but the days for Soha passed exactly the same. The only difference being that in the morning the training was with Gyeonmyeon. During the day, Yoon's brother came to Soha's pavilion and taught her from books. One day, Yoon was going to read the Shenong canon on roots and herbs, but noticing Soha's bored look, he assumed that she was not interested in listening to it at all. Of course, Soha did not really want to listen about roots and herbs, as she would have to learn a lot, but so as not to offend her brother Yoon, she immediately asked who Shenong was. Then Yoon told her that Shenong was a famous doctor called the God of Medicine, who distinguished medicinal and poisonous plants by tasting them. Of course, Yoon did not intend to force Soha to study, because last time Tanchun angrily scolded him for not helping his younger sister with her studies. Therefore, Yoon decided to appeal to pity, saying that he might cough up blood if Tanchun scolded him again. And frightened, Soha immediately took up studying. The next morning, Gyeonmyeon taught Soha to throw coins. This training was not easy for her, as the coins could easily get tangled in the long sleeves of the uniform. Moreover, Zhu, who was watching the process, tried in every way to distract Soha with conversations, despite requests not to do so. Soha could not understand why Zhu came every time at dawn. Perhaps she simply liked spending time with her sister. Suddenly, Zhu suggested having a sparring match and even allowed the use of poison, but Soha did not want to fight someone who had been training in hand-to-hand combat for more than 10 years. Then Zhu suggested talking about the making of poisons and antidotes, and if that option didn't work, to go to the smithy later. But Sohee refused, saying it was necessary to train because if Tanjung found out she was idling, trouble would be inevitable. On the contrary, Gyeomyeon thought that going to the smithy was a good idea because if the sisters got along, Tanjung would be pleased. So he looked at Gyeonmyeon pleadingly, hoping he would change his mind, but he just remained silent. Then Ju, grabbing Sohee by the hand, dragged her towards the smithy, noting on the way that her sister needed to train harder. Suddenly, Sohee asked to stop, deciding to roll up her long sleeves a bit, to which Ju asked in surprise if she really couldn't stand the heat. Such behavior was strange to Ju because the residents of Sashon were usually not bothered by hot weather. Sohee, on the other hand, was surprised that Ju did not sweat at all, even though it was early summer and she was dressed in 2 layers of magnificent clothing. Suddenly, Ju Yop called out to them, who apparently had fully recovered from illness and was now strolling carefree. Sohee greeted her older brother as was proper for her position, to which Ju Yop asked if she had fun that day. At first, Sohee did not understand what exactly was meant, but later guessed that Ju Yop realized who had painted his face in the infirmary. But then Ju interrupted the conversation, asking if Ju Yop was not going to the Kaisen house, because their father would be angry if he found out. To which Ju Yop replied that in that case he needed to hide well, and asked Ju if she had the opportunity to make sure that he did not get caught by Moyoku's eyes. And then he offered Sohee a cup of tea if of course she had no other more important matters. But Sohee refused. She did not particularly want to drink tea with a person who tried to poison her at their first meeting. And then Ju Yop realized that he had made a mistake. First, he should have earned Sohee's trust, and only after that poisoned her. Nevertheless, Ju Yop did not intend to harm Sohee because he was already convinced that the poison did not work. Although he was curious whether the body had immunity to all poisons, even if the mind was under another person's control. And then, smiling kindly, Ju Yop added that he was just joking, because in the main family there was no person controlling the mind. Then Sohee asked if it would be a person from a non-main family, meaning the barbarians of the southern kingdom. But Ju-Yop asked Sohee not to pay attention to this, because the Tang family belonged to the ruling faction, so such an option was not even considered. Bowing, Ju-Yop was already ready to leave the girls, but Ju reminded him to leave unnoticed if he was going to have fun. To which Ju-Yop replied that he was not going to have fun at all, but to search for the echo of his soul, because there was no melody within the pavilion walls that could save him. And although Ju-Yop's facial expression was quite good-natured, Sohee had the feeling as if she had encountered the pure malice of a small child. Pure but frightening curiosity when you face it. Moreover, Sohee knew perfectly well that mind control was used not only in the South. Mind control was used only by the man nicknamed Worm from the demon cult. In the novel, the demon cult was depicted as absolute evil, kidnapping children and human trafficking, torturing faction members, and more. The demon cult committed all these atrocities without hesitation. Even to their own followers, the cult was extremely cruel. They were forced to eat a parasite called Hyul-Imgo, which penetrated the host body and devoured its internal organs. And if the medicine was not taken once every 3 months, the person died, suffering agonizing pain from the organs being eaten. Therefore, it was necessary to periodically take the antidote that put the parasites to sleep, and the antidote could only be obtained at the appointed time they're reporting to the cult. Thus, the location of cult members was tracked and information was gathered. Moreover, they even managed to prevent betrayal. The problem was that the cult, as absolute evil, was not satisfied with just one parasite and ultimately created the demonic soul reincarnation potion. Unlike Hyul-Imgo, which penetrated the host's internal organs, this terrible potion affected the brain and deprived the body of control. Those who drank the potion, when they heard the sound of the priest's bell, lost their minds and completely obeyed his orders. Because of this, Namun had a hard time, as he had to deal with comrades under the control of the potion with his own hands. But this will happen in 10 years. Now Hueyu is only 13 years old, and the demonic cult has not yet formed. Although Sohee was tense that Ju-Yop mentioned mind control, when the vast majority of people did not even know about the existence of the parasite, let alone the potion. Ju noticed Sohee's paleness and asked if she was really afraid that Ju-Yop would poison her. Although there was no need to worry, because the poison Ju-Yop prepared was terrible. Although it was hardly comforting, Sohee's tension still eased. Moreover, worrying about the demonic cult now would change nothing, so Sohee decided to think about it later. Approaching the smithy, the girls were met by 2 guards who asked them to state the purpose of their visit in the logbook. Sohee was very surprised by such strict rules. It turned out they even made blood relatives register in the logbook. Zhu immediately registered and handed the brush to Sohee, advising her to write whatever she wanted, since there were no specific rules. Therefore, Sohee followed her older sister's advice, and after writing her name, added that she came with Lady Ju. A little hesitant, Sohee became curious about what other visitors had written. In principle, the other entries were just as unremarkable, so Sohee calmed down a bit. Finding herself on the territory of Ju's forge, she began to explain that metallurgy was one of the sources of income for the Tang family. Therefore, to prevent leaks, the walls surrounding the forge were covered with 8 great poisons, and Ju doubted that even Soki would survive contact with them. Of course, Soki was not surprised at all. Apparently, sensitivity to information leaks about technologies was the norm for the Tang family. Inside the forge, work was in full swing. The smiths checked the list of captured items and consulted about the furnace's thermal power. It was unbearably hot in the forge, although this was not surprising, as the work did not stop for a minute. Finally, having found Choki with her eyes, Ju suggested that Soki sit on the bench and wait. Soki did not object, but still decided to ask how long it would take. Hearing in response that the wait would be about 4 hours, Soki was very surprised. Watching the work, Ju noted that not even half a year had passed since Choki took the hammer in her hands. Nevertheless, she was doing quite well. Choki ran off to the metallurgical workshop with the intention of making weapons, not pretending to be a wise mother and a good wife, but in the end discovered an unexpected talent in herself. Hearing this, Soki thought that Choki was a genius for mastering such a complex art in such a short time and praised her for her effort. Finally noticing the guests, Choki asked, for what purpose had the sisters come to her forge? To which Ju replied that she simply wanted to have tea together with her younger sister. But Choki refused, and since Ju and Soki had nothing to say, she advised the sisters to return to the pavilion. Ju anticipated such a response, so with a sly smile, she pulled a metal ingot from the hem of her kimono. Surprise showed on Choki's face. How did Ju manage to get Gono iron, since even the elders at the forge claimed they hadn't seen it for a long time? The Bakpung Trading Guild is truly a remarkable place, pretending the goods aren't available, although in reality they are, all for profit. As it turned out, the ingot was obtained by an uncle to make a clawed knife for his niece. Ju promised to give the Gono iron to Choki if she drank tea with them. Soki, seeing Gono iron for the first time, noted that it was different from usual. Noticing the surprise in Soki's eyes, Ju explained that Gono iron is a mineral incomparably harder than iron, mined in the south, so transportation costs are quite high. Now Soki understood why the trading guild did not want to sell such a valuable item at the usual price. Smiling, Ju asked again, would Choki join them for tea? Of course, now Choki simply had no right to refuse. Sizing up Soki with an appraising look, Choki asked her to extend and open her hand. Not fully understanding what was happening, Soki nevertheless complied, and Choki placed a metal butterfly with a spike at the end into her hand. Soki was embarrassed by such a gift but did not understand exactly what it was for, so she decided to ask. To which Choki replied that the butterfly must be thrown, and taking it from Soki's hands, threw it into the nearest box, which shattered into pieces. Returning Soki's butterfly, Choki advised that next time if someone gives her poison, not to drink it, but to stick a thorn in the enemy's face. Soki was horrified. Could it be that Choki suggests sticking a thorn in her brother's face? However, the proposal was not that bad. It seemed Choki was worried that Soki drank poison at the reception, although at first she seemed cold and inaccessible. Smiling and hiding Soki's gift, she still asked if Choki was worried about her. In response, Choki was silent, but her cheeks blushed, revealing the girl's shyness. Soki held such a weapon in her hands for the first time, so she asked Choki to teach her. But then Ju interrupted the conversation, stating that if Choki gave her sister a gift, then it was quite appropriate to go have tea. At the table, Ju said that she was going to sew summer clothes from silk, and then asked if Soki also needed clothes sewn, hinting that Lady Jin could quite well take care of this, since the seamstress had already taken Soki's measurements. Soki tactfully declined, citing that the clothes gifted by Ju would be quite enough. But Ju did not intend to give up. The gifted clothes were winter ones, and Soki was having difficulties in the heat, so she suggested immediately calling the seamstress. She also suggested to Choki to order new clothes, but she shook her head negatively and said she would go to the smithy. And then Ju was outraged because the sisters should think about the family's honor. If they look terrible, everyone might think that the Tang family is having difficulties. But Choki immediately retorted that the family is disgraced by some of its members who invest money in a brothel, referring to Ju Yop. Suddenly, sensing something, Ju turned around and asked why exactly Huayop had come. So he immediately turned around. She hadn't even felt Huayop's presence, since how long had he been standing behind them? Huayop reported that Ju was looking for Muhyuk. He didn't know why exactly, but he assumed it was somehow related to the wedding date. Finally, Huayop's attention shifted to Sohee. By her beautiful face, he immediately recognized who was in front of him. Smirking slyly, Huayop noted that Ju and Choki apparently have a lot of free time since they are talking to illegitimate children. Ju sharply retorted and demanded that Huayop watch his language, but Huayop ignored the remark. Since Huayop heard about the new student of Tanchun, he thought she was some kind of unparalleled genius, but besides a cute face, he noticed nothing outstanding. So he boiled with anger because she had only formed her dantian a month ago and decided to complain to Tanchun as soon as he returned. But after thinking a little, she gave up on this idea because Tanchun might make her train even harder. Since the message was delivered, Ju demanded that Huayop leave, as their relationship was not close enough to drink together in a cozy setting. Huayop did not like Ju's words, so he was in no hurry to leave. Then Ju stood up from the table and again demanded that Huayop go away. So he noted to herself that the atmosphere had become too harsh, and if it continued, the quarrel could escalate into a fight. Suddenly, Choi stood up and asked both to stop. She promised Huayop to make sure that Ju would go to Muhyuk. This arrangement completely suited Huayop, and sighing heavily, he left despite Ju's shouts directed at him. Choi calmed her sister by reminding her that their father was waiting. Reluctantly, Ju still agreed to proceed to the main pavilion. Turning around, Chohi said that the tea party was over and Sohee could go to her pavilion. Rubbing her neck guiltily, Sohee said that she did not know the way back at all and asked Chohi to accompany her to Brother Yoon's chambers. Jumping over the pavilion wall, Sohee noted with surprise that climbing over the wall was indeed more convenient, as there was no need to specifically look for an entrance. Now Sohee understood much better Tanchun, who often did this when they were together. Yoon was peacefully dozing in the gazebo when his sleep was suddenly interrupted by Sohee, who said she had come for a lesson. Of course, Yoon was surprised that Soki came to class so early, but he was even more surprised to see Choki nearby. Noticing the confusion in his brother's eyes, Choki explained that she was accompanying Soki since she did not know the way at all. Finally understanding the situation, Yoon offered the guests some tea, but Choki refused, saying that they had already drunk tea. But Yoon wanted to be hospitable, so he suggested that Choki at least take some treats, and again Choki refused, advising her brother to try the treats himself. Soki thought that her sister had expressed herself too briefly. She could have simply said that she did not want to take food from the sick person. And to somehow ease the awkward silence that had settled, Soki showed Yoon the gift from Choki. Yoon was extremely amazed, as this was the first time in his memory that Choki had given someone a gift. At these words, Choki blushed again, and Soki slyly asked if her sister had really given someone a gift for the first time. Awkwardly pulling away from Soki, who had clung to her, Choki declared that she would go to the smithy and quickly disappeared from sight. Yoon apologized for such behavior and asked Soki to understand that Choki most likely was just embarrassed and, not knowing how to act properly, ran away. Then Yoon asked, how did it happen that Choki was a guide for Soki? And Soki told that the reason was Ju, who during the morning training had been pestering her with a request to go to the smithy. When they came to the smithy, Choki gave her a butterfly, and the three of them went to drink tea and chat. Then Soki met Hueyop, who was searching for Ju by order of the head of the Tang clan. Carefully listening to the story, Yoon noted that since Soki met Hueyop, she could not have failed to notice that he looked very much like Mokyok. In response, Soki nodded affirmatively, adding that Hueyop's voice exactly matched the voice of the clan head. Yoon laughed. Hueyop really did have an arrogant side and an unjustified confidence in himself. Nevertheless, among the brothers, Hueyop was the best in martial arts because he had studied for years under the great master Haikun. And although Yeonho is the head of the younger family, Hueyop is responsible for all interactions with the outside world. It is no wonder he is called the poisonous hero worldwide. Therefore, Yoon advised Soki to learn to get along with Hueyop, whether she liked it or not, since he was the older brother after all. Of course, Soki herself understood this perfectly, but she was more worried that one of the brothers might be a member of a demonic cult.